look back at it now, I was thinking of the good times again. But no, I don't think I'd change it again. It was experience. Something a lot of people never have the opportunity or have to do. And to this day, I don't know what happened to either unit, because we moved through into the A camp, relieved that, all the artillery had stopped at that stage. The airstrip had a long line of body bags along that. I remember that. I've never seen so many in all my life. But most of them have been killed by small arms fire, by rifle fire and that. The amount of artillery on this A camp, it completely flattened everything on top. All it was there, all you see was the trenches. And I think not one person has been killed by artillery fire. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, wherever possible, always took their bodies away with them. They were very good for that. But I think the main reason was that so you didn't know how many casualties they had. I don't think it was for humanitarian reasons, but just intelligence sort of thing. Look, I think there'll always be wars. And anyone says we should disband with armed forces and so forth is very naive. I wish that wasn't true, but unfortunately I think it is. There's always somebody who wants something that belongs to somebody else. Fact of life. Right, I was born in Adelaide, actually in Cheltenham, 13th of June 1940. Educated in Adelaide, brought up in Adelaide, enlisted in the Army in Adelaide, schooling at secondary schooling at Adelaide High School the last 4 years, matriculated. That's basically it.
And when did you enlist in the Army?
August 58. But prior to that I'd done the National Service, with 16 National Service. I volunteered for that, so that instead of going to recruit training, called Canny.
And when were you posted to Vietnam?
First time was May 66.
And in what capacity was that?
That was with SAS, Special Air Service Regiment. 3 Squadron was the first squadron there. And I went back again in 69 with the training team and seconded to the Special Forces group.
Alan, you were just telling us the story of deciding between 126 and SAS. Oh. Can you tell us, just elaborate on why you chose SAS?
Well, one main reason, that SAS were going to Vietnam and 126 weren't. So I took that posting and I said, "Is that okay?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, there's no precedent for this, but we'll just tell Central Army Records where you're going." And DMI, Director of Military Intelligence. Anyway, as I went over there, I'd seen John Doyle. He'd come back the following morning. He said, "Well, 3 Squadron is doing their pre-SAS training in New Guinea, which is the first squadron going to Vietnam. We've found a chap in there who's not up to scratch. We'll take him out and you'll be going to Vietnam with 3 Squadron. I mean, I'd only just come back in the Army." I said, "Oh, all right." He said, "Well, we'll send you across to Williamtown to do refresher jumps. You've got to do so many jumps, at least one jump every 6 months to keep your parachute pay up. Then you can go down to Sydney, down to RAF Richmond, and the squadron will be there for embarkation to Vietnam," and gave me the brief on what I had to take with me. So I went to Williamtown. I'd given up cigarettes about a year beforehand, and went to Williamtown to do a refresher jump, because you have to do a little bit of training, but nothing like the basic course. It's waiting around, and the winds were pretty high. I was sitting in the standby room and somebody offered me a cigarette, and that was it. I started smoking again. Anyway, that's by the by.
Well, so given that when you had originally left SAS, your physical fitness was quite extremely high. What had happened to your fitness during that downtime before?
Still reasonably fit. I used to run in the mornings from where, it doesn't matter where I was. Even now, I swim 3 mornings a week at minimum. I'm up at 6 o'clock, go across the local heated pool all year round and swim for about an hour. Anyway, that's not good.
But when you signed up again in '66, you weren't necessarily thinking SAS.
No, I didn't know whether we'd get back there or not. I mean, the fact you've been there once doesn't mean they're going to take you back again. I mean, anyway, I went back. Anyway, I did the parachute course. I got down to Richmond to meet the rest of the squadron, and that was really funny because we're there, and half the squadron had been come into the system since I'd been out, I think. And who's this bloke? Yeah, never seen. An element of them knew me from previous. In fact, the signal section, the sergeant in charge of the signal section had been one of my corporals before I got out. So I knew most of them. So we're about to get on the aircraft and the OC of the squadron said, "Oh, welcome." He said, "You're incorrectly dressed." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Carry on, Corporal. I've been back in the army 4 weeks at this stage, I think. So I got on the aircraft as a corporal. No, Lance Corporal, sorry, because there wasn't a position as a corporal, Lance Corporal. We arrived in country. I think I was in country 2 months, and I had two hooks, two stripes up. But that was very interesting. That was the start of the task force in country. We got there just before the task force arrived, set up. And when they moved in, they're all under poncho, little half shelters. Everybody moved into tents except us. We were the only ones still under half shelters. And we were right out on the perimeter. Then they had an engineer squadron, then the headquarters of the task force. And of course, there's that funny things. Anyway, we were sitting lying there one night and something happened. Somebody opened up somewhere. Next minute, the engineers opened up, forgetting that we're between them and the perimeter. And I'm lying on my back. I'm watching all these holes appear in my little half shoulder, the little pup tent type thing. Nobody was hurt, fortunately. Anyway, the following morning, we all got up and walked across to the engineer lines, and strange enough, there wasn't a bloke to be found anywhere. They weren't sticking around. They just opened up, forgot there was a unit in front of them on the line.
And where were you based?
That stayed in Newey Dat, down on the that stage we'd moved in next to the task force. The following squadron moved up on what was called Newey Dat Hill, which was just still in the task force. That's a funny one. We'd just been issued with an M79, which is a little grenade launcher, and we were the only unit to get them. Of course, the officers' mess at task force, a grenade from a M79 landed right in the front door of the officers' mess. It went off with an extreme bang. Of course, we had the MPs, we had everybody over us like a rash because we're the only ones with them. The following morning, an American owned up the fact that he was driving past a Jeep and had it across his thing and went off straight. If he aimed, it couldn't have been better. Straight through the door. Fortunately, there was nobody in the mess at the time. But there was a big witch hunt, but we weren't guilty. But we were all looking at each other to see who it was. We weren't surprised that one of our blokes wouldn't have done it. They'd do anything sometimes. Yeah.
And what did that weapon look like? What?
Like a little shotgun, about a barrel so long, about that wide. That thing. They now have them part of an M203. You've got an M16 on top with the M79 launcher underneath. Very effective.
What was its range and capabilities?
No. Couple hundred metres. Yeah. Enough to far further than you can just throw a normal grenade. Yeah. You could also use it as a shotgun. It had a flechette round, which like exploded like a shotgun. Anti-tank, a high explosive round and a phosphorus round. Yeah, good weapon.
And well, you mentioned you also had Owen guns and SLRs.
Yeah, we had SLRs. We gave the Owen guns away, they were useless. They might have been good in the close jungle, from here to you away, but any distance over that, they weren't much good. So we got M16 SLRs. We're also, our armourer, the SLR, or FM, whatever you want to call it, is semi-automatic, of course, you keep putting it in. Our armourer, Tiger Lion, actually adapted all ours, cut the barrels down, all unauthorised modifications, shaved the sear off so they could also fire an automatic. So if you've got a 5-man patrol, the point man or the forward scout really needs to be able to put down it comes into contact at maximum firepower in a short time. And going like that with a trigger is not maximum firepower. So these extremely unauthorised modifications were taken. They finished up getting authorised, but I think a few people shuddered when they found out about it. Mind you, it took them a long time to find out we'd done it. Very effective. But again, they were, you'd have to change the weapon over quite every patrol, because if you actually fired it, you'd burn the weapon out, burn the barrel out very quickly. Yeah.
So can you just tell me again, what did the gun look like to begin with, and then what was the modification?
An SLR, so you know the normal military rifle, the old style, what they call the FN, that, which had a barrel about that long. When we cut off the muzzle down about that long, we put there was a heavy barreled FN, which had a longer magazine. We put that on it. And we cut, and they'd changed the sear on it so that instead of just firing repetition, you just press the button and it fire automatic. Very effective. Very effective.
And was there any use for the sawn-off bit of the...
No, just thrown away. It's only a bit of metal.
And who okayed that unauthorised?
I've never been quite sure. It just happened. I think our armourer, who was a sergeant armourer, Tiger, I think he just done it for his own back. Probably did one, said to the boss, John Murphy, that this seemed to work all right, and John probably said, well, I haven't seen it, go and do it. we were pretty laid back in a lot of things we used to do. I mean, things you would never get away with in a normal unit. But that's the nature of the unit. I mean, we had vehicles over the west for long-range reconnaissance, which were normal Land Rovers that had no resemblance to a normal Land Rover, and none of them were authorised modifications. We had extra border tags put into them and everything else. At 2 years down the line, we'd put in and get the modifications agreed, but we'd do it. But if you waited for the system to do it, you'd be waiting forever. It's like the public service. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to talk more about the gear that you had, but just to clarify before we get into that in more detail, you're at Nui Dat, and who were the men that were in your platoon?
Platoon. We had it was
a squadron.
Squadron, which is about 100 and just under 120 all ranks. But OC was John Murphy, Major. Fantastic chap. The 2IC was Jeff Chipman. The 3 of the troop officers were ex-diggers of mine that all went gone through OCS, Peter Schumann, Trevor Roderick and Pud Ross. Very unusual in the army to have blokes like that. And we just had 4 troops all cut down into each troop had 4 patrols of 5 men. And that's how we operated.
And who was in your 5-man patrol?
Well, being at that stage, being a SIG, I used to alternate. My normal patrol was a bloke called Des Kennedy, Joe Urquhart. Joe was another patrol. Maxie Aiken, who was in Adelaide. And a bloke called Dipso Wilson. He liked his drink. And that's a story in itself. But and the other one varied. But I used to go out with a lot of other patrols. If they didn't have a SIG that was adequate, I'd go out with them. Because as I said, the communication was the most important thing. It was all right going out the area, looking at the, observing the enemy. You've got to get the information back. And it's not easy operating radios in close proximity to the enemy with antennas and all that sort of stuff. So I used to go out with a lot of. In fact, myself and a bloke called Gerald Croucher probably did more patrols than most of the others because of the nature we went with patrols that we weren't actually attached to. But no, it was interesting. You wouldn't move very far in a day because you're so careful to move. They had some funny experiences. We had one patrol that, and I wasn't at it, that moved. And what our system of movement, you'd move in the day. Before last light, you'd move around a big circle and come back on the trail. You'd just come along on the track you go on. You'd observe that for a while so you know nobody was following you. If you were, you'd ambush them. Then you'd look for the biggest clunk of bamboo or thicket you could find, and we'd go back and we'd all crawl into it. Being a 5-man patrol and being out for, say, 7, 8, 10 days, staying awake at night and doing sentry duty, obviously you wouldn't be capable of doing anything after 5 days. So what we all used to do, find this big thing and go to sleep. Because if anyone was coming near you, you'd hear them a mile off because of the foliage. And anyway, one of these patrols had done that. In the early hours of the morning, a hell of a ruckus around it. And they found that a NVA company had moved in and bivouacked around them, and they were all hiding in this little cloak. And anyway, we hadn't heard anything from them for a fair while. If they don't come up with their normal schedule, radio schedule, then you probably sent a chopper over or something to listen on a Sabi, which is a hand. Anyway, this chopper was going over the top, and these blokes were down there, and these blokes were whispering, "Right, say, get away!" This went on for about a day and a half until the NVA moved away. I'm glad it wasn't me. But we had about 2 months after a very similar occurrence. We were in a hide, and all the noise started and the chattering of the Vietnamese. And I thought, oh God, the odds of it happened twice, you know. And when we woke up, we found it was a tribe of monkeys had moved into the trees around us, and it sounded just like the locals. So that was very, very relieved. But there's funny things. I mean, when you look back on it, they weren't too funny at the time. Yeah, bloody monkeys.
Well, in camp, where you were set up, how did you set up? Did you set up your camp according to the patrols that you were in?
Yeah, you lived with a patrol. Yeah, each patrol lived in their own tent. Yeah. As I said, the whole thing of the unit is that you rely on everybody, you live closely, you know what they do, you know as much as possible know how they think, what they would like to do. Yeah, each patrol lived in their own environment. And even then, I had a patrol I normally worked with, but even the patrols that I went out with that I didn't work with normally, I know all them, knew all them very well at any rate, so it wasn't really a problem. But when you're 120 blokes, you know, you get to know each other over a year very, very, very closely. And they train, bearing in mind, with the exception of me, they just finished 3 months in New Guinea working, doing the same pre-Vietnam training. So they were all pretty close-knit group.
Well, how was the camp set out? What did it look like?
Tense. Oh. We had a big marquee set up as a mess tent. We built a boozer, a wet canteen. Then we built a sergeant's officer's mess because we were told by task force we had to. Prior to that, we all used the same one. Tents with sandbags up to about that level all around it. Then we started digging pits out the back. Now we only did a token job of that. One thing SAS is not very good at is digging holes. Battalion goes out with trenching tools. Now we don't do any of that because you never have time. Anyway, so we started digging holes. Anyway, the night before, or 2 nights before, Long Tan, we got mortared, the task force. Most of the mortar rounds landed in our area and the artillery area. We had 11 blokes who were wounded. Anyway, as soon as I remember sitting down on the bed and hearing this sort of sound. I thought, somebody said, "That incoming or outgoing?" And then went bang, incoming. So we were immediately out the back into this pit, which was woefully inadequate. May I add, it was only about that deep. I did a count and found out it was 1 bloke short. So I crawled back into the tent on my stomach to see he was okay. He wasn't there. So back out. And when it all finished, I found out this bloke had gone out the other flap, ran about 100 metres across to another pit, and then there. I kicked his rear end all around the camp. In fact, I had to get out and go in and see where he was. Because it was SOPs, you just went out one side in the this bloke just, he was on that side, but God knows why he ran 100 metres to go into another pit when there's one about 15 metres away. But the following morning, you've never seen so many shovels flying in all your life as our pits got dug a lot deeper. They've had to use them again, but that was that. But we had one bloke had his eye removed, and then it was, as the doctor in the hospital said, nothing he could do about it. It was if he'd been removed with a scalpel. A bit of shrapnel just took his eye out. Not a mark anywhere else. Just a little nick there. Unbelievable. Yeah. So
going back to the description of the camp and how it was laid out, you had the mess tent, the wet canteen, and
the tents all around.
The trenches.
Mm.
And what were your sleeping quarters like?
They were tents, normal tents. The old Second World War style, which were quite good for up there actually.
How many men in a tent?
Normally had 5, 6. Normally 5. Yeah, they were quite comfortable. I mean, we used to knock up old ammunition cases and make chairs and bookcases and all the mod cons, that you tend to do in that environment. We made ourselves a movie theatre, outdoor movie theatre, which was extremely funny. We had the theatre, of course, faced into the camp, so it couldn't be seen from outside. And we were showing a movie this particular night called The Lost Command, Anthony Quinn, about the La Paras in Algeria. And Anthony Quinn's here, and they've got all these mortars lined up ready to fire on the riffs on the thing. And as he goes like that, and they drop the first thing down, everything went haywire around the perimeter. And we had tracing going, It's almost like it had been orchestrated. And it was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. Best sound effects. Yeah. But no, it was interesting.
What did you have around the perimeter of you?
Where we finished up, we had units all around outside us. We didn't do any guard. We didn't man a perimeter at night. For the nature, because of the way we worked. We were on the perimeter initially, then they brought us in, so we were right next to the task force headquarters. So we were in probably as much as protected place as you could be. And that was done deliberately, so we didn't have to. I mean, you can't man pits at night, gun points, and do 5-man patrols during the day. It just, there's not enough people to start with. So we would have had out half the squadron would be out on patrols at any one time, except for Christmas '66, and we had every patrol in the squadron out. And that was the time we came out. They brought back all patrols from the battalions, everything had been brought back in the task force so they could celebrate Christmas. And SAS, we sent out 3 squadron, every patrol went out. In fact, we made up an extra patrol from the cooks and the clerk and the pay clerk. Billy Nagel, the wrote one angry shot, would have gone out on that. Anyway, we came back, and I can't remember whether it was 29th or 30th, and something had happened, and somebody threw a punch or something, I can't remember. It would have been over drink. So, and next minute, the whole squadron at having a punch up. You had all the engineers hanging over one fence, the medics hanging over another fence, all clapping on their arm. It was the funniest thing you've ever seen in your life. Why it happened, how it happened, I still don't know. None of us can remember, but it just happened, just letting off steam. Yeah. Is that in the angry shot? Is it? Yeah, I can't remember. I must look at it again. Yeah. Yeah, quite educational.
Well, you said you made chairs out of, or makeshift chairs. What did you make them out of?
Old ammunition boxes, wooden ones. We'd go and steal all the wooden ammunition boxes from the Australian artillery. Most of it at this stage were wearing American camouflage outfits, which we'd either conned, stolen, or whatever. Appropriated. But we'd anything that wasn't, In fact, we were the only unit that we had a jukebox. Now, considering the Vietnamese weren't allowed in our area at all, it wasn't until about 6 months after we had this jukebox, somebody asked, how the hell did the jukebox get here and how's it serviced? We used to smuggle this bloke in to service our jukebox, blindfolded and take him out again. Yeah, I know. We have a lot of entrepreneurial skills in the unit. Yeah. No, we made ourselves very comfortable, as much as you can. It was very miserable, not too good during the wet. The wet's not very long there anyway. And the other thing that a lot of us, people don't realise that during the summer, the heat, the dry in Vietnam, it does get very dry. You can walk for days without finding any water at all. So when you went out on a patrol operation, of course it was even worse, but you had to carry twice as much water as you normally would, because you couldn't get any resupply. And people just think of tropics, it's wet all the time, but it's not that way at all. And areas we were, it got very dry. Yeah, excuse me.
Well, talk us through the daily routine and how you, pardon me, how you would be briefed for your patrols. You
mean a patrol? Right, you'd get a warning order that you were going on a patrol. Then you'd have the patrol command and the patrol 2IC, there'd only these 3 others in the patrol, would get and be told the area we're going into. Then we'd have a briefing of the whole patrol by the operations officer. Now this is again different than a battalion. If a battalion went on operation, only the commander of the platoon or section would be told, then he'd have to brief it. But everybody was briefed at the same time. There's only 5 of you anyway. You'd be told how you were going to go in. If you had a problem with that, you could bring it up. At all stages during the planning process of an operation or a patrol, anyone in the patrol could have input or come up with suggestion. The boss didn't necessarily have to agree with it, but you could come up, which is a good idea because there's always somebody who thinks of somebody that somebody else hasn't thought of. So hopefully you catch all eventualities. You do that, then you get all your gear, you test fire your weapons, you'd make sure your maps were right, your communication gear was right, all the codes, and because everything we did was coded. Nothing was sent in plain language. Then you'd go to, if you're going in by chopper, you'd go to the landing, the pad, 9 Squadron to pick you up, take you into an area, and the normal procedure there was 1 chopper for the patrol. It was just a single patrol. 2 gunships. You'd go into the landing zone, and go in. Choppers would go across, and it was all done very quickly. So if nobody would know where you've been dropped, because I don't know whether you know, but in the jungle you really can't tell where a chopper is. You can hear it, but you don't know where it is. Could be anywhere in a 360-degree circumference area. And they'd go. Then we'd move off. If you went into an LZ and it was a hot LZ, in other words, it was the enemy was already there, and you come under fire, then you'd make an assessment. You'd either jump back in the chopper quick, call the chopper back in and get out quick smart, or you may head off in a different direction and try and evade the thing. It depended on the occasion. Once you moved, then you moved, and as I said, we used to move very slowly, so make no sound, and the fact that you could hear anything else around you, and watch for ambushes. You'd never use tracks, because that's what they use. We would move. You'd stop for a cold lunch, you know. Then we'd do at night. We'd do the procedures I explained before around the table. You'd wake up first thing in the morning before first light, and we'd go and stand to, just make sure there's nobody around. Then we'd move off, and you may stop about 10 o'clock and have a brew up, depending on where you were, if you thought you were reasonably safe. And that was your routine. Things you didn't do: you never used any soap before you went out on a patrol. You never took cigarettes, or we never. You never used any sort of deodorant after shave. You could smell it a mile off in the bush. Nobody used hair oil or anything like that. Little things in a battalion you don't have to worry about, because you can hear them a mile off. But no, it's and that was basically it. If your patrolled area was covered and your time frame was up, you would then normally get in the last, and we used to have set skeds. You'd come on the radio certain times, so each patrol would come up in their own time frame. They didn't, so one patrol not sitting in while another one's trying to. On the sked, say in the last day or 2 days before, they'd probably say, "All right, you got open slather, so you could do what you like." If you'd seen somewhere that looked like a good ambush or good something to have a go at, we'd set up an ambush, hit them, then run like hell back to where the choppers are going to pick us up. And when I say run like hell, that's literally, because nearly every time, of course, you had an contact, I think, you're outnumbered, vastly outnumbered. So it was a matter of what we call shoot and scoot. It worked. We didn't lose too many. In fact, at my squadron we only lost one bloke, Russell Copeman. He died later of wounds. Youngest bloke in the squadron, young Russell. Yeah, so, and that was sort of the routine. You get back to the LZ and it was the same as the pickup, the drop-off, infiltration. Two gunships, a slick to pick you up. What they'd normally say, the chopper would come in, you'd throw a smoke grenade. The chopper would identify as I see blue, I see red, I see green smoke. You'd say affirmative and he'd come in. If he'd seen red smoke and you'd thrown yellow, he wouldn't come in, you'd go to head off to another LZ. Because the Viet Cong, which were predominant down there, if they were an LZ and they see a chopper come in, they'd throw smoke deliberately to think that the chopper would come in, but that way you'd identify it. You go back, you'd have a debrief, and you get cleaned up, then you'd have a final debrief, and at that stage you hit the boozer. And that was a patrol.
And sorry, what coloured flare did you throw for the
Depended what you wanted.
pickup?
Yeah, we carried all different colours. You'd just throw anyone, say it was white, red, yellow, and whoever was coming in would identify, I see red smoke or green smoke. The chances of anyone else using the same colour smoke is pretty remote. And if he's seen two lots of red smoke, he'd soon say, well, I see two red, and I say, well, I've only thrown one. So, again, it's the same scenario. But it worked well.
And what sort of pre-designated pickup point did you have?
You had that all worked out before you went out. Your infiltration LZ and your exfiltration LZ. The way we did it, that's where the expression "phantoms in the jungle" come from, out of the book from the Vietnamese. They had propaganda that they put out publications and put money on people so captured, and they actually called them the phantoms of the jungle. So that's where it came from. Pretty pretentious, but still. Yeah.
Okay,
all
well,
good fun. Boys' own annual stuff.
Okay, could you just define for me the types of patrols that you undertook?
Well, basically the main role of SAS, and still is, unless you're in a counter-terrorist role, is reconnaissance. To identify the enemy, then hopefully bring in the big guns to deal with them. Our main role was reconnaissance. Sometimes we did purely ambush patrols, an area we'd been in before, and we knew something was happening, we'd send in another patrol, or sometimes we might send in two patrols together, so to beef up the odds, so we'd have 10 men on the ground, purely ambush. The reconnaissance patrols, as I said, invariably at the end of your patrol, and if it wasn't going to compromise the fact that you'd been in the area, they would say, right, be our guest, have some fun. And you'd set up an ambush or do whatever you do. You'd actually go and look for something to do. We had a few search patrols, in other words, going into a hamlet, and one patrol would secure the area, and we'd go through and check for traps and hidden tunnels and that sort of stuff. But basically everything was rolled around reconnaissance. I mean, that's the role of the unit. Everything else is just gravy. It's interesting, after saying that, when 3 Squadron come back from Vietnam, we had, and if this is terminology offensive, I'm sorry, we had more confirmed kills than the battalions combined. And that's in 5-man patrols. Mainly because we're in the areas where they were. I mean, a battalion goes on operation, the enemy hears them coming, so they're going to go somewhere. We go out, they don't know we're there. And that's the advantage. On the same token, if they go out there and we don't know they're there, it's reverse. You're a bit vulnerable. So that was basically it. Basically, reconnaissance patrols, but at the end of it you do a bit of ambush or harassment or whatever you want to do. Every now and then we'd have a straight ambush patrol, or for instance, we in the New ED, well, the high hills, there was we knew there was a clandestine Vietnamese, Viet Cong radio station, and we sent 3 patrols, well spread, to specifically look for that radio station, and found it. But that was primarily that's the job. That's what they did.
And how long would you be out on patrol?
Oh, it depends, and it depend on the time of the year, whether it was dry, wet, and what the job was. It would normally between 5, 7, perhaps sometimes 9 or 10 days, but that was relying on what you could carry. So bearing in mind that you didn't want to get resupplied, but as soon as you're resupplied, you're pinpointing where you are. There's somebody there. I mean, the battalion doesn't matter. I mean, you've got 900 blokes wandering around the bush, and you know they're there. But no, so it really relied on the resupply, on how much you could carry. Yeah.
And what resources would you pull on the environment that you were in?
In what respect?
I'm
Sorry.
just thinking that would you actually use the environment, the jungle that you were in? Would you utilise any resources within there for food or anything?
No. Very rarely anything there in a lot of cases. I mean, you had deer, barking deer. This is down too, but you couldn't use them for game. As soon as you fired a shot, you had it. We didn't have fires, not open fires. Sometimes we have a little hexamine, in fact what we used plastic explosive, which burns very fast and boils water very quickly and with no smell. But slightly illegal, but it works very well. So there's not a lot of you could. 2 Corps, when I was up there later with Mike Force, we certainly did then, with a different kettle of fish. But no, SAS you can't. You use what you took with you, and what you took in with you, you also carried out, so you didn't leave any traces. For instance, we never dug holes to bury refuse. We'd take a bag with us and carry it out, so nothing was left there than say we'd been there.
And what time of the day would you conduct patrols?
You'd start at first light and go through to last light.
And then during the night, who kept guard?
Nobody. That's what I'm saying. At night, before your last light, you'd swing around circle back on your trail. We'd sit there for half an hour and make sure nobody was following us. Once you'd ascertained that, you would have identified the biggest, thickest clump of bamboo or scrub you could find. We'd all go up there and we'd virtually burrow in and hide ourselves in there, and we'd all go to sleep. The principle is if you're out there for 10 days with just 5 of you, you'd be absolutely beat by 3 or 4 days if you sentry at night. And anyone comes near you, you're going to hear them a mile off, better than a sentry. Mind you occasionally got a rough elbow in the ribs if you look like even it's coming out with a snore or a cough. The bloke would dig in. But no, it was quite effective. Never had any problems with that at all, except for the time when, as I said, a patrol was in the bush and an NVA company moved in and bivouacked around them for about 18 hours.
And how did they stay silent that whole time?
I don't know, but they did.
What techniques would you employ to stay silent in those types of situations?
Well, we very rarely ever talked at all. It was all sign language. Sometimes you had to. and it would be whispering virtually in each other's ear, especially when you're doing a communication sked, because you're working out what you're going to write down your message, and you're encoding it at one time, letter pad and all sorts of stuff. So you had to talk then, but bearing in mind that when you set up your sked, your radio, you're as sure as you possibly could be that you're in a reasonably secure environment. I mean, you wouldn't set it up if you otherwise. But other than that, everything, all movement through the bush was all by sign language. You know, if you wanted someone to come to you, or there, or whatever. It's all sign language.
Could you take me through some of the sign language that you use?
Well, that's come to me, all right? I'm going to have a look over there, or you over there. Friendlies, enemy, self-explanatory. When you turn around means if you're on a track, veer off to either side and go to ground. There's probably a lot more. I can't remember them offhand.
What was stop and go?
Oh, just yeah. Well, actually, no. Stop was normally just halt. Go was underrun.
And I had read that some of the SAS actually attached string to their fingers to lead themselves.
To do what?
To lead. To actually, like, they attached string and they would actually, that's how they travelled through the night.
Why?
To travel through the night.
Oh, no, you didn't travel the night in Vietnam. Never, ever. I don't know of any squadron that did not patrol in Vietnam. No. We did do similar things like that in training prior to Vietnam, yeah. Like, a squadron may have done it, but I don't. First to me.
And how would you describe your enemy?
Well, a mixture. Some of them are very good and some of them are very slack. Some of them would move down a track, for instance, a trail with hardly any noise. Others you'd hear them a mile off. If they're purely combatants, they were normally pretty good, probably. If they're local Viet Cong, they weren't very good. NVA were very, very good. But they were very limited in their communications. Later, when I was up at Dugal and they attacked the A camps, I'll talk about that later, you could always predict if they're going to attack, they'd do it one way because they had to plan it so much because they didn't have communication between different groups. Whereas we had flexibility, you could change what you're doing over radio. They had a degree of communication, but not very much. They were dedicated. They did some nasty things just after I got up there. They south of Baria, they had gutted a little 7-year-old girl, split her right up the middle, throw her intestines out. And they did that deliberately because a medical aid team in Baria had been really doing a lot of work, and the Vietnamese community had been coming on side with it. And they did that really purely so that the medical team would come out at night and they could ambush them. That happened about 3 weeks after I arrived in country. And it put a different scenario on the whole thing completely into my eyes. That stage it was only out there just for a job, but I thought anybody could do a thing like that. There's something wrong with them. That's what they did.
And the ambushes?
They didn't get him. Didn't get the medical team. They wounded an MP with him, but that was it. Didn't get the doctor. Yeah. And the kid was fixed up and safe. I don't know what happened to her after, but yeah. Pretty horrendous. I just can't imagine anyone would do a thing like that. But worse things have happened, and probably will.
And your own ambushes, what How were they conducted? Like, were there different types of ambushes?
No, we never actually. SAS ones, no, I can't think of that. Well, 3 squadrons, we didn't ambush any road. We ambushed tracks. Bearing in mind there are certain areas that the locals were supposed to keep out of. So anything that moved in that area, you could pretty safely say was enemy. Now they always use tracks to move from point A to point B. All their porterage, all their equipment and food was moved on these tracks by either on bicycles or panicles or by poles, you know. But they were fair game. Yeah, you set up an ambush on them. Yeah. We have one that's in our book, the family, called the tractor job. They were moving gear with a tractor with a trailer behind it. They ambushed that, you know, rather successfully. Yeah.
You spoke earlier about when you went out on patrol, trying to not have any overt smells. How were you actually dressed?
Just straight greens. Army greens, until we appropriated other stuff from the Americans.
Was it just the Americans that?
Well, they were the only other one. They were the only ones with camouflage equipment. We actually dyed most of our greens. We put them and made them try to camouflage them. So we didn't have any camouflage gear in those days. But the point is, once you're out in the bush for a while, your greens, the old army green, the old jungle greens, were almost black through perspiration and that. Few of us wore hats. Most of us wore just a sweatband around the camouflage sweatband around our foreheads. But that was an individual choice. It was individual choice what you carried. I mean, you could carry anything you like, as long as you carry your weapons and ammunition and so forth. But how you carried it was up to you. How you dressed was up to you. I mean, you look at some of the photos, they look like a pack of pirates, but it worked.
How did you prefer to dress?
Well, I used to wear greens, but I'd obtained what they call a BAR belt, which was a Browning automatic rifle belt the Americans had in the Second World War, which had all pouches all around it with a quick release bar. I used to have that with all my ammunition and on there, and I carried a Bergen rucksack, which had my gear and the radios in there. So that was quite good. Actually, I was lucky because I think there was only about 2 of us who managed a con BAR belt. I'm not sure how I got mine, but I got one.
And what were the supplies that you carried with you?
We started off with the Australian 24-hour ration packs, which were little tins of stuff and so forth. Then later we got hold of American alert packs, which is their long-range reconnaissance patrol packs, which is dehydrated stuff coming in a sort of bag, you just add water to them. They were quite nice. They were light, but they were bulky, whereas the other stuff wasn't as bulky, but it was heavy. So we preferred the alert packs. But again, if it was a dry season, you had a problem with water to rejuvenate them, but regenerate them. But, they were good. Yeah.
Please don't take this as a very personal question, but I am quite curious that when you moved on, you could not leave any markings of having been there. How did you go to the toilet?
Well, you would urinate if you had to, but you very rarely, because the rations needed to go while you're out there. Now, in other words, you come back after 7 days rather full in the face. But no, really, you're very... Occasionally, somebody would have to, and then you would dig a little ditch with a machete blade, and you'd really make sure it was covered up. But very strange. It's something I've forgotten about, but strange enough, I can't think of a patrol I went out and I actually had to do that. We did and smells, we did a patrol, Des Kennedy, it was a normal control. Top of Fukui province, and we were coming into where a river flowed along the top, and we stopped anyway, and it started on the bank of the river. It started foliage started to thin out, and we were. And I was sitting nearly on one leg, near a tree. And I said to Des, he came over, and it was urine. One of the locals had just urinated against the tree. So we moved very, very, very carefully forward, just to see on the other side of the river 3 columns of Vietnamese, one going out that way, one going that way. Going out, they just moved out of the area. If we'd walked in there 20 minutes earlier, we would have bumped right into them. But I could smell the urine on the tree. That's how. My urine's got a strong smell anyway. But but it made us particularly careful. I thought, what the hell is that smell? I thought, it can't be. And I said, yeah, you're right. So we were especially careful.
You said before that when describing your enemy that some were actually very, very good. How close did some of the VC get?
In what way?
How close to you, to your patrol?
Oh, here to that doorway? Not very often, no. That's when we're just watching them on a trail. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't, in a reconnaissance, it was just a matter of observing them, counting them, knowing where they're going, what they're carrying, then letting that information get back. Normally it was further away, but I suppose the closer it would be from here to that door. Mind you, it was pretty well hidden at the time.
I'm just thinking that...
And I'm sorry, that's not right. I wouldn't have been from here to there, but the bloke that was actually doing the OP, because I was back a bit, we normally have one bloke up close and the rest covering him, sort of thing. But he would have only been from about there to there.
You actually sound like you were quite a successful squad for a foreign environment. This was their natural terrain and you had mastered it quite well.
Well, the two differences, don't forget, the average Vietnamese is an urban dweller. Very few of them live in the bush. We practice in the bush all the time. So it was more natural to us to them. Very, very few Vietnamese live in, even if those live in the country, live in paddy fields and things like that. They don't live in the jungle. Montagnards do, Vietnamese don't. So to them, it's not a natural environment. And for us, it is. I mean, again, bearing in mind that nearly everybody in the SAS Squadron went to Vietnam, have been training together for years in that sort of environment. New Guinea's a good area to train. I mean, we're the only unit that trained in New Guinea prior to going to Vietnam. All the rest went to Canungra. So, this business about the Vietnamese being jungle fighters is a bit of a myth. I mean, they really weren't. That's why they never went off tracks. They get lost. Most of them wouldn't have compasses, wouldn't have maps. There's a lot of myths about Vietnam, I tell you.
Well, if they didn't have maps and if they didn't have compasses, what were their orders? What were they doing?
Well, they're moving from point A to point B. To do that, they just go along a track with it. It goes from that hamlet to that hamlet. Or they would be told, go on that track, go walk 2,000 paces, turn left, walk another 500 paces, and you'll find our base camp. That's how they do it. Oh, some of them had maps and some of them had compasses, the senior officers and that. But the general file, Viet Cong didn't. Talk about the North Vietnamese Army, different kettle of fish, which is what I had, that's what we had in the latter part up in Tukor. But the Viet Cong, No, they were quite tenacious, and they were dedicated, but no, they weren't very well equipped in that respect, and they didn't know their bush. Some did. I mean, some of them you find the occasion was probably a woodcutter or charcoal burner, and they still have charcoal burners in Vietnam, or did in those days. But invariably, most of them lived in villages or cities, and wouldn't go in the jungle at all.
You mentioned earlier the nickname of Phantoms of the Jungle. How did you find out about that nickname?
It came out of one of their pamphlets of warning the locals about this mob and putting a price of anyone that come up, captured one or killed one, and so forth. And then their nickname was the so-called Phantoms of the Jungle.
And how was that said in Vietnamese? How was that pronounced in Vietnamese?
Oh, God knows, I lost most of my Vietnamese. I used to be able to speak it reasonably well. Now I can't remember half of it.
And how did you guys react when you saw that there was a bounty out?
Well, it wasn't an individual bounty. It was just a bounty if somebody had been actually captured or killed. Unlike when I went up north, we actually had bounties on individual heads. But no, I thought it was a big joke, actually. What else would you do? Didn't really mean much. As long as you did your job, you're pretty right. Yeah.
And did you think that that nickname was appropriate for you?
No, we thought it was a laugh. Phantom of the Jungle, what a... Pretty pretentious, isn't it? Anyway, that's by the by.
But did you feel like Phantoms of the Jungle?
Not really. Not really. Very, very grubby Phantom of the Phantom.
Going back to the patrols, you made mention of being dropped in by chopper. How did you be discreet about that?
We didn't have to be. You'd pick up your landing zone where you're going to drop off, your infiltration zone. You would also pick up one or two alternatives, so if that one was compromised, you go to another one. The choppers had come in just above ground at tree level. Now, if you're on the ground in that environment, you can hear choppers, but you don't know where they are. You can't pick up a location. And there's really no difference in sound when a chopper comes in and drops people off and keeps going. So in that respect, unless you're actually seen, it's pretty right. And bearing in mind, you're only going into a clearing in a jungle. It has its problems because, and there were other ways of going in, but we went into one day, and I did my back in pretty badly at that stage, and we're about hovered about that high off the top of the grass. Of course, we jumped. I had the Bergen on the back, and we all, but unbeknown to us, the grass was 15 feet high. It bent over, and so instead of jumping from there to there, we jumped with full kit on our backs, about 13 feet probably, by the time we hit the ground. I just lay there. Thank God there was nobody down there. We would have been dead. But we couldn't. You couldn't tell from up top. It just looked like normal grass, but it was all tycoon. So those sort of things sort of threw the possum, created a few problems, but that was the only one case. We also went in, sometimes they went in by M113s, personnel carriers. Personnel carriers would be going out to do an operation, and our blokes would just go out with the personnel carriers on operation, and they'd just drop off on the way and just fade off in the jungle. And the track carriers would just keep going. Sometimes, if it was an area reasonably close, you might walk in. But walking areas out fair bit. It was obviously impractical with the time frame of what you had to carry. But normally it's by chopper. Yeah. Yeah.
And what was your relationship like with the pilots?
Very good. When any of our blokes, oh no, sorry, not right, when most of our chaps had a day off, go down to Vung Tau, instead of going and staying in the army environment, they go around and stay at 9 Squadron around at the RAF base. 9 Squadron, the rapport between 9 Squadron and the SAS was very, very high. In fact, where they were dedicated, if we had a recall on the choppers and they had other jobs, they were dedicated, they had to come out and get us, and they were very, very good. We actually have 2 blokes from 9 Squadron march with us on Anzac Day instead of with the Air Force, because 9 Squadron's been disbanded. No, rapport was excellent, excellent. They were very, very good. I can't think of one case where they didn't do a job or above what they should have had to do. No inter-service rivalry there, I tell you. They're extremely good.
You made mention earlier about the success of SAS and only having lost 1 man.
That was 3 Squadron.
3 Squadron, sorry.
Yeah.
How did Russell sustain his injuries?
They had a contact. I can't remember how the contact occurred. He was wounded about 3 times. A chap called, I can't remember his Christian name, but always known as Juvenile. Juby Matten, who was a big bloke, bigger than I am, bulkier than I am, picked him up and carried him for about 5 kilometres on his back to the LZ. While the others put up the tail. They got away okay. Russell Copeman was brought back to the hospital at Vung Tau. His father was in the Middle East as a UN observer. They flew him back, that's how bad he was, and his mother up from Australia. When he was strong enough, they repatriated him back to Sydney to Concord Hospital, and about just under 2 months later he died in hospital.
What were the injuries he sustained?
He's wounded in the abdomen, I remember, abdomen, shoulder and arm, if I remember rightly. There's always, there's a bit of investigation. It's believed, but I'd never confirmed that in actual fact he was supposedly recuperating quite well, that he was given a wrong medication. But no, it's one of those things. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. That was a scuttlebutt. But then again, rumours go around. But I think it was the fact that he's supposed to be coming good, and so long after he came back that he died. But they have some remarkable, I mean, a medicator. We had a chap in 2 Squadron, no, 1 Squadron, young Lieutenant Simpson lost both his legs on a mine below the leg. Flew him down, he was in base hospital till they got him ready to move, brought him back to Australia. The Squadron came back to Swanbourne 4 or 5 weeks after he'd been wounded. 2 days after the Squadron turned up, the Commonwealth car turned out the front, and Simpson got out and walked through the front gates of Swanbourne Barracks on artificial legs. That's not bad. I think the whole thing from wounded to walking through was 6 weeks. Both legs. Fortunately for him, both below the knees, which is easier. But to contemplate, don't I?
When the men heard the news of Russell's passing, how did it affect the mood?
Can't remember, to tell the truth. Really can't remember. We're all pretty cut up about it to a degree, as much as they can be. I mean, they all get pretty blasé about it. But no, just one of those things, another casualty of war. Yeah. This business about it, probably a hospital hadn't spread at that stage. I mean, it just died of wounds, that was it, which is what he did do. Yeah, no, I really can't remember there was any, what I consider real problems about it. I think Juby Matten, the fact that carried him out, was a bit cut up about it. But no. And the other thing, I suppose, a little bit, so it was the fact that he was the youngest by age in the squadron. I think he was 19 at the time. Just going, no, he would have to be nearly 20, but he had to be 19 to be over there. Yeah, so, yeah, I really can't recollect any particular reaction about it. You know, not that, other than what you'd expect. Yeah. Nobody went around beating their breasts or tearing their hair out, or that sort of stuff. Next.
Well, I was just thinking about debriefing. Just thinking, you mentioned that you'd come back from patrol back to camp to debrief. What did debrief consist of?
Oh, you just went through the whole patrol, day by day, what actually happened. Not all the routine, but anything out of the ordinary that happened, you know. But that was pretty basic, I mean. And that was all put on the maps and anything you found and so forth. Then I went across to, any information went across to Task Force Intelligence. Biggest problem was that by the time the information went from Task Force Intelligence, then got to the operations people, then got the battalion, what we'd seen already gone. Which is why we started doing reaction courses, reactions after. Some of those areas we'd go back in and ambush ourselves. But it just took too long for the battalions to action it, which has always been a problem, and probably always will be, reaction time. Yeah, no, it was, as I said, just a debrief, just a general debrief of the patrol, any pertinent things come out, anything in particular. All your maps would part of the individual maps, which we held all the time, would be passed in and the centre and things like that. Any problems with communications were brought out, were thrashed out. We'd remedy how we'd fix them. Any recommendations that if you go into that area, a different type of weapon should be taken for a particular thing, all that sort of stuff, you know. And that was carried forward. And they were very useful tools, debriefs. Probably more so than the briefing itself, because you could sit down and work out what you're going to do in most cases. But they would take, depending on the patrol, what happened, any activity, anything for an hour to 4 hours. And you get going to clean. It always did it before you got cleaned up, so it was all fresh in your mind.
And how long would, on average, would the reaction time be to go back in and conduct your own ambushes?
Well, it would depend. If we thought it was worthwhile, we'd recommend to the OC, John Murphy, that do it. He would clear it with task force. Then we could, as soon as we had the assets, the choppers, and that, we'd be able to do it. So it could be anything from a couple of hours to a day. If you're talking about the task force, it could be anything up to a week, which is obviously, you know, unless it's a base camp you found, and that's a different kettle of fish. But no, it didn't happen very often, but it happened occasionally, where it was what we called a target of opportunity would come up, and we'd do that. Yeah. But we did one with the whole squadron, except for one troop. But that was, we'd found a series of caves on the mountainside were being used. We got permission to do a squadron, the only one we know of, I think. Yeah, so that was it.
And how did that ambush work?
Which ambush?
The one that you just talked about, where you found the caves.
Oh, that wasn't an ambush as such. That was just moving in and checking the caves out and clearing the caves. We found about 5 people there, I think, who were subsequently, 3 of them were killed and 2 got away. But found a lot of stores and a big cache there. And it was also the same area that I remember mentioned. There was a clandestine Viet Cong radio set up. It was virtually in the same area. Yeah. It's an area the Viet Cong in Phuoc Tuy treated as very much their own. Nobody went anywhere near it. I don't think the battalion ever went in there.
And what did you pack for an ambush?
A lot of ammunition. No more than you normally take on a patrol. Except you might, if you're going in for a deliberate ambush, you'd probably take in a M60 machine gun, which is something we never normally carried because of the weight and the ammunition you have to go. But if you're going specifically for an ambush job, you'd probably take an M60. And if you had two patrols combining for an ambush, you'd probably have 2 M60s, I don't know. I never actually went on a set ambush, except just after we got women in the rubber plantation, banana plantation. That didn't work out. But we did a few of them. 2 of them were very successful. I think they didn't see anyone. The ambush that I was involved in were opportunity ones after end of a patrol, which is difficult if you're just using a normal weapons you carry on patrol. Yep.
Sorry, could you explain that to me, an opportunity ambush?
Well, at the end of a patrol, you'd get a message saying, look, you've done your patrol area, we've got all the information, you've got a day or 18 hours or whatever to wait before your chopper picks you up and you get back to the LV. Anything that in there that you think is a good opportunity to ambush or attack or whatever, be our guest. So you'd go along and you see something and think, oh, that's all right, we'll have a go at that. So you set up a track that's being used a fair bit, you set up an ambush on there and just wait till somebody comes along. And that's called an ambush of opportunity.
I think that's a good place to leave this tape.
Yeah.
How are you feeling there?
Oh, I'm right as rain.
So we're talking about patrols with 3 Squadron on the first tour. I'd just like to pick up again and ask you, what was in your long-range recon packs that you took out with you?
What the average person carried? Well, the weapons varied. You'd have an SLR with converted to fully automatic, which was unusual. We'd have M16s as weapons. Some of us carried 9mm pistols, but not very often. Everybody carried a compass and map. I, as the patrol SIG, would carry all of that. Plus, I'd carry an HF radio, little 64 set. Looked like a little lunch pail, an American lunch pail, and sometimes a what we call a 25 set, which was a VHF set, very high frequency set. We'd also carry 2 what we called ERC-10s, which was about so big, which had a beacon in it. If you got in trouble, you just pushed the beacon and the aircraft would hone in on it, and also had the facility to talk from ground to the aircraft for emergencies. You carried rations appropriate to the amount of time you're going out, and you were literally festooned all over with as many water bottles as you could carry. Everybody had a first aid kit. One member of the platoon who was designated as the patrol medic would carry a more comprehensive medical kit. We'd carry a tube of blood expander or plasma in case where somebody's wounded and you had to inject into their veins. Your headdress was depending on the individual. Some wore hats, giggle hats. Some were just a lot of us just wore the sweatband type thing tied around the neck like an Indian style thing. We never carried bayonets, but we always carried a knife of our own choosing. Normally one person carried a machete.
What knife did you carry?
I carried 2. I carried a flick knife and stowed in the top of my boot for escape and evasion, and I just carried I had American K-bar, which is an American fighting knife. Marine. We all carried a marker panel, which was a little bit of cloth, iridescent cloth, that you could put down so you could see from the top. We carried smoke grenades. We carried some of us carried M26 high explosive grenades. Sometimes one person would have a M79, that's a little grenade launcher. What else do we have? For sleeping, we would normally just have the poncho, which we'd never put up. We'd just lay on the ground and wrap ourselves up in it because they show up very. Of course, you always have mosquito repellent, mite repellent. Well, not mosquito, mite repellent. Water purifying stuff. That's about it, I suppose. I can't think of anything else.
And how many water bottles would you be carrying?
Me, I used to carry 1, 2, 3 or 4 around my waist with a pack, and 2 on either side of the Birkin, and a big bladder. But again, depending on what time of the year. If it was during the wet or there's plenty of water around, of course you'd reduce that. The other reason we used to carry a lot of water is because if Charlie was going to bivouac anywhere, he always bivouacked down by water. So you're more likely to bump into him down there than you are anywhere else. So you kept away from it as much as possible. I mean, the idea was to observe them from a distance, not kiss them. So, but again, it depended on the individual, it depended on the patrol, type of patrol and the individuals in it. I can't think of anything else offhand that we carried.
Well, I'd like to go back to the SIG equipment that you just mentioned you were carrying. How did it work?
In what way?
Well, you mentioned you had 3...
No, our main mission committee was a high frequency, what we call a PRC 64. So about so big, like that long, that wide and about that high, with a lid that opened up. It was always operating on Morse code. You had to put out a wire and aerial antenna to use it, and that was the biggest problem, of course, anywhere, because as soon as you start putting out antennas, hanging them in the trees or whatever, you're noticeable. So we had to be reasonably secure whenever we had our skids. Sometimes we took the 25 set, which is about size of that container, about that high, that wide, about that thick, very heavy. We only took them when we really had to. We normally just rely on the 64 set. Then we had the ERC 10s, which, as I said, were about size of a cigarette carton, or half a cigarette carton, which was a beacon, had a beacon for, and also had the ability to talk between you and the aircraft. And they were the means of communication. And of course, the other thing is you carried with it was your encryption method. Everything you sent had to be encrypted, or everything you received had to be decoded. And we used, for that, we used a one-time letter pad, which is one of the very few codes which is almost unbreakable. Almost every other code is. It's very laborious, takes a while to do, but it's very, very effective. And that was virtually what we carried.
And what call signs did you use, or?
Changed all the time. Never used the same call sign. We changed call signs all the time and frequencies all the time, which is unlike a battalion. They use the same call signs.
And how did the terrain that you were moving in affect those communication operations?
High frequency didn't make much difference. As long as you put up the proper antenna to where you wanted to operate, you normally got through. Very rarely we never got through. Might not have been particularly good, but the fact we're using Morse, so you'll get through on Morse code to areas that you'll never get through on using voice communications. So that's why it's such a specialised thing in SAS.
And how often would you need to call in, or?
You would normally have 2 skids a day minimum, and in case we always had a radio operator back in base on a frequency, emergency frequency, not listening to normal skids, and he would be there just listening if you come up in the emergency frequency. And you could use that for a lot of things. Not normal routine, but real emergencies. Yeah, but it worked very well.
Well, you say you change frequencies a lot. Was there a frequency that was safer than the others, or?
No, you just made sure you moved around. Well, sorry, you didn't change frequency all the time on a patrol, but each patrol you went out, you used a different frequency and a different call sign. We'd use the same call sign through a patrol. But we also had a procedure that if we thought the call sign or the frequency was compromised, then we would go to a different one, change the call sign and change the frequency.
How would you know if it was compromised?
If, for argument's sake, you found out that somebody had lost some paperwork that had those things listed on it. I mean, very rarely. I mean, we had a case of a young lieutenant, not in my squadron, a ladder squadron in Vietnam, who actually, doing a reconnaissance before a patrol went out, lost the map out of the aircraft into the jungle and didn't report it initially until somebody found out about it. And when they found out about it, but the fact he didn't report it, he was immediately sent out of sent away from the unit to another unit. It wasn't the fact that he lost the thing, the fact that he didn't report it. but that could have compromised the whole patrol. So these things happen. I mean, the fact is you're compromised in that respect. In frequencies is very unlikely that you'd know about it, you know. Yep. Anything else?
And I'm just curious about the different call signs. Can you remember just an example of one of the call signs? Or?
Not really. They just changed. Could be Whiskey Alpha, Varro, Bravo, Sierra, Mike, whatever you want to call it. We just had a good list of call signs we make up.
And when you were speaking about the enemy, when you were calling in, how would you refer to them? What names would you?
Well, you never use voice. It's all Morse code.
Morse code.
And it'll be encrypted. But if you're writing in a message, and you were writing the message, then you would encrypt it. You would put say, 2 EN SIT grid number 5 LW 7 HW light weapons 7 heavy weapons. You could abbreviate it down to a breadth, so pretty well, so everybody knew what they're talking about. Yeah, authorised abbreviations, and some we made up ourselves. As long as everybody used the same one, you're pretty right.
And how truthful is I mean, one of the images circulating about the SAS is that they wore face kind of camouflage. How true is that?
Well, yeah, you do. You wear face camouflage. Most of us, well, all of us, as soon as you got a warning order to go out, never shave to start with. That did two things. It saved you from using any soap or shaving cream. It also whiskers, unless you've got real blonde, real white, are a good face camouflage, but they break up the outline of your face. But you'd find that to use cam cream out in the bush, it was right to a degree, but you got that dirty anyway. All you were doing is you're breaking up the outline of your face. But yeah, no, you use it. I mean, most people use that.
And what was cam cream? What?
Oh, it's just a grey and green cream. Just smear on it, strike over your face to break up the outline. Yeah. No, that's standard. That's standard operation. Yeah.
And the other standard that you've just mentioned in your packs, you carried some medical equipment, or I think you mentioned a pouch of blood.
What they call blood expander. Just what you do if somebody was badly wounded, you would you break it open. You got in a plastic file with plasma in it, for want of a better word. Put the needle into their veins, so if they're bleeding profusely, it expands the blood and they don't die of blood loss. Well, theoretically, that's the reason. The other thing, of course, everybody carried files of morphine with them, which incidentally even the medics in the army aren't supposed to carry. We also had which I never mentioned, we had a special run by the School of Army Health, an SAS med-aid course, which covered things that the normal medic in the army didn't cover because of the nature of what we used to do. We never carried as far, but for instance, American Special Forces medics were even covered to amputations and that. We weren't trained to that extent. I'm not saying some of them would have tried it if they thought they needed to, but the Americans were actually trained for it, American Special Forces. They're medics. They do things that doctors would do.
Well, how extensive was your medical training?
Me personally?
And your patrols?
I never did the long med-aid course. I just the normal medical stuff you do, which is pretty, gets you out of trouble. Tourniquets, pressure points and treating of wounds and that sort of stuff. Yeah. But the long med-aid course, the SAS med course was very good. They'd go over the hills, or they'd do the course, I can't remember how long, and normally come back and do 3 months seconded in the casualty centre at Royal Perth Hospital for on-job training. So they've seen some pretty horrendous things. I never did that. I'm not quite sure whether I'm glad I didn't or sorry I didn't. Glad I didn't, I think.
Well, what was the procedure for calling in the medics when you were out on patrol and something happened?
If you got contacted that badly, there was somebody badly injured, then you'd call in you would call in, get up on the set, call in the choppers, arrange which LV you're going to, landing zone you go to, then you'd make for that and get picked up. If it was a real emergency, you would probably get a chopper come in and winch somebody out on a harness. But normally you'd try and carry them back to a LV.
And how often did that happen on your patrols?
Didn't, only once. Russell Copeman. And he was carried back to an LV. We're very lucky actually. He was the only casualty apart from the 11 blokes with when we were mortared. But on operational patrol, Russell Copeman was the only one not wounded. With our squadron. Had subsequent ones killed, but not very many though.
Yeah, it is surprising.
No, it's not good training. They're really, no, just not seriously. That's the main reason. I mean, the average bloke in SAS had been trained in the job for years doing the same thing, whereas a bloke in a battalion had only been doing it 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months. A hell of a difference. There's a lot of things you do in it, you do it instinctively because you've been doing it that often. The chances are if you were ambushed, an SAS patrol was ambushed, the chances of getting out of the ambush successfully would be about 100% more than it would be if a section of a rifle company got ambushed, purely because of the training. Which is one of the reasons the selection course is so high.
Well, you mentioned earlier that 3 Squadron had a very high number, and I'll use your word, kills, on the patrols that you were on.
Don't ask me, I can't remember. I really can't remember. No. No, I've no idea. Not all that many in direct firefights, and a lot of them were killed when we bought it. And some of the jobs you'd do would be you'd be in an area and see a concentration of the enemy, and then you would call in artillery right on top of them. Now you're credited to agree with those kills, so were the battalions. Because if you weren't there and directed the artillery fire, they wouldn't have got hit anyway. So a lot of it was that and airstrikes, but I don't know how many individuals a patrol. And, we had 3 major ambushes, no, 2 major ones, I suppose. Probably only about a dozen that I can think of in front of me. That's not me personally. I don't know if I killed anyone in this 3 Squadron. In fact, I don't know if any of us have fired because some of us probably fired at the same bloke. And you're never quite sure who actually hit who. So anyone that goes around saying the guy, unless he's the only person aiming at someone, nobody else there, you're never really sure whether you personally killed him, hit him. That make sense? But I hear some very strange stories come out by people that I think that doesn't work that way. And it takes a lot of rounds to hit somebody. I've seen a bloke run across in front of a Montagnard company, the whole company shooting at him and not touched.
Well, I was going to ask you, when you're out on those 5-man patrols, what was the chain of command?
Patrol commander was the leader. 2IC, you had a pecking order. You always worked if something happened to somebody else would automatically take over. But it never really became a problem because everybody just did their own, instinctively did what they're supposed to do. And like everything else, you get to a scenario, if somebody, like the orders groups, if anyone had a thought or wanted to put something in on the orders group, they were quite welcome to bring it up any time, and everybody would listen. You didn't have to do what they suggested, but you'd do it. So even though the patrol commander was in charge, he'd always listen to what the others had to say.
But how would that, I mean, five-man patrol is very small, so you've still got a forward scout and somebody doing SIGs.
You're on your patrol. Your forward scout goes first. Your patrol commander comes second. Your SIG comes third. Then your other two bring up the rear end. Right? Now, it depends on who they are, the composition of patrol. You might find, for instance, sometimes the patrol commander goes out is a corporal in a particular patrol. One of the other two patrol members at the rear end, one of them might be a sergeant who's just filling in for patrol. The patrol member because somebody's ill or something. So instead of the patrol 2IC, normal patrol 2IC taking over, the sergeant might work out between us that he'll take over if something happens. But it was all very flexible. It's got to be. But generally speaking, the normal system was patrol commander, patrol 2IC, the patrol next rifleman, second rifle. The SIG was never given, very rarely given that responsibility, but he had too much to do anyway. The SIG normally got apart from the hardest job in the patrol, because when you stop, he's setting out comms, he's carrying the biggest load. He's when you have a stop, he's making up the signal, the message on the pads. He's sending the stuff. He packs up, then you'll move. Somebody else prepares his meal, but he doesn't have time to do it. So from the time you get up in the morning to the time you stop at night, that one patrol member never stops working. Well, they all work all the time, but they're always watching what's going on. But physically, never, doesn't even have time to make up a brew. He has to rely on somebody else to do it for him. So obviously, unless it's special circumstances, the SIG does what he's supposed to do, operate the signal stuff.
And
clear as mud?
No, it's actually, that's a very, very good description. That I'm very clear now, and I'm then wondering, given that you as the SIGs would have so much to do that you're constantly occupied, when you would make, on the occasions that you might make contact with the VC, who would it be? The forward scout that would?
Well, it depends where the contact's made. If it was in the front, forward scout would normally fire. He would and then go to ground. Then you'd make an appreciation of what happens. The patrol commander would say we either get out of here, but there's too many of them, or we'd engage them. At that stage, you all become just riflemen. The SIG, everyone just. You don't worry about communication at that stage. You worry about that when you break the contact. So you just become another rifle, another weapon. Yeah.
And how often did you see the VC?
Not all that often. I would say you'd probably see him or sight or spur of him every patrol. You'd only come across groups, I say every second, third patrol. You'd only have a contact every now and then. I'm talking about an individual patrol. But I went out on, I can think of 2 patrols in particular that we've seen absolutely nothing. And very relieved, may I add. But no, there are patrols you never seen. Same with it. If you look at the overall figures of Vietnam, of troops there, and even the Rifle Battalion, I don't know, but I would suggest you would be lucky if 1 in 20 blokes in a Rifle Battalion ever fired his rifle weapon in action. But they don't see anything. Mind you, the others make up for it. But no, a lot of it's just repetitious work and just going out and doing your job. In fact, you go out there sometimes, you really wonder whether you really want to find something or you don't want to find something. Either way, it's satisfying. If you don't find anything, you know there's nothing in the area to worry about. But that's the job too. It's reconnaissance.
And when you first went to Vietnam, who were you expecting to fight?
Fight.
Or yeah.
Viet Cong, which is what was down there. Phuoc Tuy province had nearly all Viet Cong local force units. I think the main, if I remember right, the main unit in Phuoc Tuy was a local force battalion, D445, which was one of the units at Long Tan. We followed up all the trails after Long Tan. We went out and followed up all the blood trails and that. Looking for bodies and that, didn't find too many bodies. We found a lot of blood trails. They carried everywhere away that they could. But the second time it was all NVA, North Vietnamese Army.
And I guess what did you and the squadron perceive of the Viet Cong as an enemy?
Oh, I think I had a healthy respect for them, but as I said, they weren't very good in the bush, and I didn't have the strength down in Phuoc Tuy to do a hell of a lot of damage, except when they brought people in for that the big ambush at Long Tan. But no, they were quite good for what they were. Bearing in mind they were all just local volunteers. They weren't regular army or anything. Yeah.
So that tour lasted approximately 9 months.
Mm.
One thing that you've mentioned that might have got you through was a sense of humour. How did that play out in the squadron?
Oh, I don't think anyone took themselves seriously, if that's what you mean. Oh no, it was all pretty light-hearted when we weren't. I mean, they played hard, but they worked hard, but they played hard. They were pretty good in that respect. The only time I've seen everybody get a little bit really peeved off is when we're coming home, and because of the fact that we came home earlier than the battalions did, the headquarters AFV, Australian Force of Vietnam, just said to us, the squadron commander, John Murphy, take your squadron and go home. He said, oh, when are we going? He said, make your own way home. So we sent a group, myself actually, and 2 others to Saigon. Every aircraft that was going out that we could find places for, we just radioed back to the unit and said, send up 3 packs or 2 packs and put them on. Murphy and Mick Wright, the CSM, were the last out. Were the last out of it. I was the third last out. I went out before they did. I got out on a Pan Am flight and flew from Pan Am to Singapore. my flight marrying up from Singapore to Perth fouled up. So Pan Am put me up at the Singapore hotel until they could get a onward flight to Perth. 10 days later, I was still at the Singapore hotel. Compliments of Pan Am. I was single, didn't worry me. And they finished up getting me on the Air India flight to Perth, of which there were 5 people on it. There was 15 crew. Best flight I've ever done in my life. But that's how we got back. I've never had anything happen like it before. Yeah, just make your own way back. And we got them back on Hercules any way we could back to Perth. I'm not sure whether it wasn't supposed to be an initiative exercise. We did it though. Yeah, unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah, make your own way home.
Well, it's a very unusual.
Well, nobody believed it when they said it, you know. I would have been, I'd love to have been in headquarters when they told John Murphy he would have done his stream, but no, yeah, find your own way home. That's how we did it.
And what kind of OC was John Murphy?
Absolutely superb. Lovely mate. Suave John, we called him. He had everything going. Good looking, charming, debonair, good soldier. He was the epitome of everything you would want. Finish up, unfortunately, dying a horrible death. He finished up being he's a heavy chain smoker, but he finished up with cancer of the throat thing. Had to cut his tongue out and finished up dying. But no, lovely bloke. Yeah, couldn't have asked for a nicer bloke or a good boss. Yeah.
Well, in hindsight now, looking back on that first tour and 3 Squadron, what do you think was the key to success for those patrols? And
just good training. I mean, you might moan and groan, we might moan and groan about repetitious training, but it pays in the long run. Most of the stuff blokes done instinctively. They didn't have to think about what they wanted to do. They just did it. And that was it, I think. Purely the good training. Esprit de corps. Don't know which is sadly lacking these days, but that was it. Yep.
And were there any times that either you or any of the mates considered that it may have been a bit futile?
No, not really. Bearing in mind you're all professional soldiers. There's no national servicemen in it. Not knocking national service because they did a good, outstanding job. But no, I think everybody is up there just doing the job they're trained for. And in 66, 67, there wasn't a degree of futility about it. In fact, it wasn't in 69, 70 either. Excuse me. Yeah.
And when you came home, what was the reception like in Australia to returning Vietnam?
Not a problem. Not a problem. We came back. See, we came back as a unit, mind you. In our case, in dribs and drabs. We came back as a unit. We went back in the Swanbourne. We're back with people we knew all the time. When we went out out of the regiment at any one time, even before we went away, nobody ever wore uniform. We all wore civvies, the nature of the unit. And there didn't appear to be much we didn't detect any anti-war bias at all. I came home on leave, subsequently met my wife, but no, I wasn't really aware of any of it. I know it was around, obviously, but no, it didn't affect us. Well, it didn't affect me. Mind you, I've got to hide like a rhinoceros. Somebody say something to me, I'd probably just ignore them anyway. Yeah, no. I don't know. I can't remember the fact of being any demonstrations in Perth. There probably were, but I can't remember.
And I think demonstrations might have happened a bit later, in full force, a bit later anyway.
Yeah, they would have been. They certainly were when I was away the second time, yeah.
So what happened to you when you returned after that first tour?
Oh, I came back. I went on leave. Met my now wife. We're married. Came back to then back in Perth
How did you meet?
at a dance in Adelaide, Norwood Town Hall. Why the hell I was at a dance at Norwood Town Hall, I can't remember, but I was. We met there and subsequently married. Anyway, when I went back over the west, I was going back to take a troop back in 2 Squadron, which was 1 Squadron relieved us and 2 Squadron relieving them. And I was going back as take a troop back with 2 Squadron. And this is where it will get very thin. And when we went to do our embarkation medicals, they just brought in a new medical system, and I went to do my hearing and medical, and I got downgraded from FE, forward everywhere, to HO. In other words, couldn't leave Australia. To put it mildly, I was, again, a bit upset. At any rate, that was it. So in lieu, we put on a big party at my place for my troop that was going away without me, and that was very successful. Anyway, they sent me to the Commonwealth Acoustics Laboratory to get my hearing tested. Who then asked me why I was there. I said, because the Army said I'm deaf. The comment was, if you listen to dog whistles, you probably are. But to all intents and purposes, you're not. But that was the system. So I then had to leave the unit, because you can't be there unless you're forward everywhere. However, the CO at that stage was Len Isles, back there as a colonel, wrote to Army Office and requested that I be retained in the unit in a training role. And they agreed. So I stayed there running all the regimental SIG courses and one of the selection courses, which is the second one I helped with. And then I stood that for about a year and seen the squadron training to go away, and not for me. I loved the regiment, but I didn't want to stay around watching everybody else go away. So I applied for a transfer and got sent to as a squadron sergeant major of a signal squadron, my first unit signal squadron at Watsonia. The only thing was it was a CMS squadron that didn't have any soldiers. I was an SSM, Warren Officer Class D, of a squadron with nobody in it, though I didn't have a job. Anyway, so I went down and had another medical while I was there, I had my hearing, and this time I rose up to it. And what I'd done, the Army, had what they call their PULEM system.
Sorry, the what?
PULEM, so I can't remember what it is, physical evaluation, so forth, so forth. As a certain trade or a certain job, you had an employment classification number, say it was 278. The parameters for your medical would be FE when it was certain parameters. If you changed your employment code to a different employment, say in the system administrator, which is a senior NCO or one officer you could do, then you didn't have to have such a stringent qualifications, parameters, to become FE. So I changed my employment code to assistant admin. I went down to the medical, and every time I was in the hearing chamber, I just sat there and went 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, hoping like it I was doing the right thing, and finished up on the old employment code. I was HO, not to be exposed to loud noises. Under the new employment code, I became FE again with the same hearing, but could be exposed to loud noise. That's how stupid it was. So I immediately volunteered for the training team and got accepted. Did the training in the advisors course, and when I went back to Vietnam. Nobody ever said the Army's perfect, I tell you.
And where was Watsonia, or where is Watsonia?
Victoria. You know where Greensboro is? Heidelberg? Out past Heidelberg.
Can I just go back to Vietnam on your first tour? You made mention of Long Tan. And that was quite a significant battle in the history of Australia's involvement in Vietnam. How long had you been in Vietnam when the battle occurred?
Oh God, I can't remember what happened. About 4 months, I think. I remember rightly, it was about 4 months.
And what was the squadron's role in the...
Reconnaissance, still, yeah, same as right through, yeah. We'd been, no, we hadn't been in that particular area just before. We had reported back some significant movement north of Long Tan, but I don't think there was any time for that to be followed up. But no, that was just one of those things. The company walked into a big ambush, easy as that.
And you went in after the battle?
Yeah, we went in to follow up the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong trail, see where they went. Yeah, you could see where they'd carry their people away with blood trails and all sorts of stuff. I don't know. There's a lot of story of how many people they lost there, but I'll tell you what, they lost a lot of blood.
How many troops were in there combined from the VC and NVA?
I can't remember the truth. NVA, there weren't NVA there, they're all Viet Cong. Oh, sorry, there may have been a few NVA in there to bolster, but it was basically Viet Cong units, yeah. What they call main force Viet Cong. Yeah. I can't remember the details of it. Long time, quite frankly.
The Australian troops came off quite well. How did that change the morale?
I think it made any difference, quite frankly. We didn't look at it quite the same as the rest of the task force. Don't quote me out of here, please. It should never have happened. You don't have companies walking into ambushes, and that's what they did. I mean, a rifle company of a battalion walked into an ambush. Now, they handled it very, very well, but they should never have got themselves in the situation to start with. That's a professional soldier's point of view. But they did very well, very commendable.
Can I ask
You've
how...
probably never heard that point of view before, but still.
Well, now I'm led to ask, how did that situation occur
I don't
there?
know, but I wasn't on the ground when they did it. The only people that were actually there could tell you. All I can tell you what the aftermath of following up on it. But actually what they actually did the rest of it's all hearsay. Unless you were actually there, you wouldn't know. And my experience is that these things happen, and you can ask 3 different people what happened, and you'll get 3 different answers. But everybody looks at it from a different perspective, or what their memories of it. But that's a personal point of view, might I add.
And just briefly before we leave the patrols on the first tour,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know how you actually unwound after.
Didn't worry me. I didn't. I just came back and just went through my normal routine. I've never had a problem in anything I've ever done. I just go from one thing to another and just start doing something else. I got out of the army, I got a head under the army and go into another job. Just another job.
And how did the rest of the men in the squadron unwind?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think any of them had any real problems. Some of them have now. A lot of them have got real problems. No, they all seem to handle it pretty well at that stage. And bear in mind, we came back and most of us went on leave, so we didn't see each other for another month or so. But as far as I know, the people that I associated with closely, like Maxie Aiken here now, no, I don't seem to have any problems. Just come back. As I said, you're talking about a unit of regular army soldiers coming back as a unit. It's just part of the job. Whereas the national servicemen, I really feel for them. I mean, they put over there, they came back, virtually discharged, and never seen any of the blokes they worked with after. It must have been a bit traumatic for a lot of them. But no, I don't think it affected most of us at the time. I think some of them have been since, but
And did you have leave in that first tour?
No. During the tour, no. No.
So we'll move forward now back to Watsonia, and you were saying that you were doing training to be a trainer and an advisor.
No. Before you go on the training team, and it's AATTV, they actually run a advisor's course at Canungra, at the old jungle training centre. And I went up there and did a course up there before I went away. And then you just wait for your posting order to come. That's a 4-week course, 6-week course, can't remember. 4-week course, I think. Bearing in mind, you're all senior NCOs, warrant officers or officers on it anyway, so it's only a matter of learning some, working in with the ARVN and Americans and so forth. And most of us on the course, I did already been to Vietnam anyway. Well, that's not right, about half of it has been, I suppose. Yeah.
And what was the crux of the course? What was the main objective?
Well, just to advise you on the way the Vietnamese worked, Americans worked, coordination and bringing in American air power or American airstrikes, or working with American artillery or Vietnamese artillery, excuse me. Then we did a colloquial Vietnamese course. I can't remember how long that was, where you learned speak enough Vietnamese to get by. I think the whole thing must have been almost 2 months, kind of thing.
Sounds quite intense for a short period of
It
time.
was, but it was very social. It was everybody in the sergeants' mess. We all enjoyed ourselves. Yeah, no, it was good fun.
And having spent time in Vietnam previous to that, did you find that the course was quite accurate in what they were advising you?
Yeah, reasonably, but the thing is, I get back to what I was talking about before. When you're working from the task force, you are very insular from the rest of the community, the Vietnamese community. Unless you go down and rest and recuperation for 2 days down at Bong Tao, and then you probably go into a bar or down to the stuff. You don't really have anything to do with the Vietnamese, unless you're trying to shoot them or something like that. The training team is completely different because you're actually living and working with them. And that was the difference. So as I said before, most of the blokes that went into Vietnam with the task force, when you ask them about the Vietnamese, they really haven't had much to do with them.
And you waited then for your second posting to Vietnam. What did you do in that time that you were waiting?
Very little. I walked around with a regimental sergeant major of 6th Regiment. I was over in the mess having a cup of tea at 10 o'clock, normally watching something. No, I just helped around the place. I didn't really have a job. I was only a couple of months while I was waiting anyway to go away. I resettled. I took the opportunity to resettle my wife back in Adelaide. That took a couple of weeks, bringing her back home. We had a young daughter at that stage, and she moved back here with her stay with her parents while I was away. But I didn't want her staying over in Melbourne by herself, not where we were anyway.
So when you did get your posting, how did your wife react?
Oh, I can't really remember. I think just accepted it. I mean, she knew what I did before we were married. Her brother-in-law was in the British Army. Her father was in the British Indian Army, British Army in India. She just accepted it. I think I've never really asked her. She obviously wasn't overly enthused about me going away, but recognised it with the job. Yeah.
And by this time, it's around 1969, is that right?
August 69, yeah.
So some of the opposition to the war is starting to mount in the general public. Did you get a sense of public opinion?
No, I didn't personally, no. It was certainly I think there was a big demonstration down on Albert Park at one stage. That was when they burnt the. No, that was miles away, because Margaret told me about burnt the tails of the police horses and that. No, most areas I went, people were pretty supportive, as far as I can remember. I can't personally think of a bad situation I ever found myself in at any stage about Vietnam, on a personal basis. I mean, I know a lot of people did, but no, I never had a problem with it. But then again, I never associated with those people ranty, so that's one of the reasons.
And were you watching the media and seeing how they were reporting what was going on in Vietnam?
69, they weren't really anti at that stage of Memorani. They started to become very the other way with the moratorium. So I think halfway through that tour, early mid-October, mid-70, I mean, sorry. And of course I was away at that stage. But even when I came back, I didn't have a problem with it either.
And did you think the reporting that you did see was accurate?
No, hardly any of it was. Most of it was all based on sentiment more than factual stuff. I mean, some of the actual shots that occurred were different things. You know, the famous one of the little girl that had been hit by napalm running down the street. I mean, all that sort of stuff was right. But a lot of the stuff that was reported as happening really was a big beat up. And if you'd actually been there, and a lot of it wasn't right. When I was at Pleiku, we had a big operation where we lost one bloke. Everybody's wounded except me, actually. The Australian media made a big beat about Australian-led mercenary troops bashing their way through the jungle and stuff by a man on the spot. The man on the spot, who is, and I won't tell you his name, is probably supposedly the most respected world correspondent, Australian war correspondent in Vietnam, was nowhere near there. He did it all from Saigon. And so were some of his other things I happen to know. So, and that was indicative of the whole thing. And they would just report what they think people wanted to hear. I'm sure of it. And things haven't changed much now either. But no, I mean, obviously there's an element of truth in a lot of it, but a lot of it was a big beat up, from my point of view anyway. Yeah.
You said earlier that there were a lot of myths about Vietnam. Do you think some of these myths were starting to emerge now?
I think they are, yeah. I mean, one of the things, for instance, is the fact that the North Vietnamese and the Vietnamese were outnumbered, outgunned. When I was up in Pleiku and up there, we were outgunned and outnumbered all the time. We would have companies operating against North Vietnamese regiments. We were taking artillery fire from across the border when we didn't have any artillery support at all. You never heard any of this stuff. It was all the fact that the big guns were on the side of the South Vietnamese, the other side didn't have it. That didn't apply. In actual fact, it was the other way around. But again, not in every area, depending on where you were. Up to Corps, it was, of course, it's closer to North Vietnam, so their supply route was a lot much shorter. But no, they were pretty well supplied and equipped. They had more people. Certainly in Central Highlands they did. Was that the question you asked me? I forgot. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Well, just going to your posting now to the second time back at Vietnam. Yeah. What was the journey the second time?
I flew straight into Saigon on Qantas, remember rightly. Got off there, straight across to the Americans' store, where they fitted us out with all American equipment, M16, 45 automatic, all American uniforms. though we had all our own stuff. I then went from there across to our headquarters of training team to confirm my orders and confirm that I was actually posted, seconded to, or posted to the 5th Special Forces. I then went up to Nha Trang, which was the 5th Special Forces headquarters in Vietnam, and did a familiarisation stint with them for, I think, 10 days. And I'd been up there before on the previous thing. We went up there to help them run their recondo course, but that was only just a sideshow. Did the 10 days there, and I flew from there by Air America and chopper to Pleiku.
And what did your familiarisation consist of?
Just climate. It was actually acclimatisation. When I went up there, the rest of it, Nha Trang, were all American, and that all just come in country, never been in country before. So it was just acclimatisation, mate, getting them aware of what the place was like, the climate, orientation. I mean, I just went through it as a matter of. The best part of it was actually we did a bit of the American med aid, a few things that we never cover, and I found that quite handy. Don't ask me what they were, but I remember at the time I thought that we should do this in our system. But I recommended when I got back that we did, and I don't know whether SAS did or not. Yeah. So yeah, from there up to Pleiku.
And you're in a different. Your role in Vietnam was quite different now.
Well, the training team is called the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam because 62, that was its job. It was there as a training group. In early 64, it really got changed. They became advisors and combat advisors to Army Republic Vietnam regiments and battalions. The only difference in that was those few of us that went to Mike Force, which was predominantly, well, 2nd Mike Force was at Pleiku. One Mike Force which had been disbanded was at Da Nang, and that was composed of what they call Cambodians and Nungs. Nungs were ethnic Chinese in Vietnam. 2nd Mobile Strike Force at Pleiku was all Montagnards. Do you know anything about the Montagnards?
I know a bit, but I'm hoping you can tell me more.
Well, they are very interesting people. There's about 13, I think at least, that I know of different tribes. The main ones we had 2 main tribes in my company. They were Raday and Jarai, and we had 3 others. I can't remember. I can't remember the name. The only 2 that spoke a language that was similar were Raday and Jarai. The rest all had their own language. None of them a lot of them could speak Vietnamese, but they wouldn't on principle. There's no love lost between the Vietnamese and the Montagnards. They're basically ethnically Malay stock. They look like Malays, most of them. In fact, they even have a couple of words, kampong, for instance. They use kampong, which is Malay Indonesian, for their longhouses, and they nomadic to a degree, not on the move all the time. They set up villages, but if something happens and they'll move it. They're spiritualists. So if something, I think a spirit of a tree is taking a slant, they'll up village and build one somewhere else. We used to go out and actually recruit them in the villages. Then we'd bring them back in, dress them, educate them as much as possible to a degree in the time frame, train them, and you're taking somebody that normally goes around in their normal habitat in a loincloth and uses a crossbow as his weapon, and taking him out and putting him in boots, uniform, teaching him things, wet fire, modern weapon. To see a before and after is quite unbelievable. You wouldn't think they're the same people.
What was your recruiting technique? What was
Well,
your
we
argument?
just go around and shove a fistful of dollars and say who wants to join my force. That was basically it. I mean, more than that, we'd have a Montyard with us when we've been in it for a while. But now you go around recruiting the younger blokes, and there was never any lack of volunteers. Though there were Montyards with the North Vietnamese, they were in a minority, and most of the North Montyards just didn't like Vietnamese, period, because the Vietnamese had treated them very badly. The Vietnamese classified the Montyards as an inferior race. They weren't citizens of Vietnam. That's why they weren't drafted into the South Vietnamese Army, and the Special Forces, like CIA, seen them as a method of making a mercenary force. They were a mercenary force. The other reason is that they had set up their own armed forces called FULRO, which stands for Federation United Libertarian French, right? And they seen that as a method of training their young people for their own armed forces to combat the Vietnamese. So it wasn't hard to recruit them. What was hard is determining how old they were. But you can never tell whether they're 13, 14, 18 or 19. I mean, they're very hard. We always had to, but they didn't, there's no records. And we'd have to take the assumption that if he looked like he was too young, we just wouldn't take him. He had to look and have a mature body before he'd be accepted, not like some of the people in our group these days. And it's a problem when you don't know how old they are, and they don't have records themselves. They just roughly born the year of the auction or whatever it is, you know. And they were recruited. They brought back. They were recruited. Our training company in 2nd Battalion was actually run by Australians. Second company, 223 company, was Australian run. The other companies were American run. So you had a company commander, 4 platoon commanders were Australian. The other 4 companies were commanded by Americans with American platoon commanders. I went in there as a platoon commander with 223 company, and done about 3 operations with that. The OC was company commander was a bloke called Dave Paul, was a Australian Army captain, and he got posted, and I took over as a company commander. But they were very good. I thoroughly. It was probably the most satisfying time I ever had in the Army. You had, bearing in mind at that stage I was a warrant officer before I was commissioned, and you've got officers in the Army that go right through from Royal Military College right through, never have the opportunity to actually operate and control a company in operations. Doesn't matter what sort it is. And here I was a warrant officer running a company in operations, and it was great. It really was.
You mentioned before their spirituality. What?
Sorry?
Their spirituality.
Oh, they were animist. That was it. If they had a religion, it was animist. Yeah.
And
yeah. Everything had a spirit. You know, trees, whatever.
And how did their beliefs work with the philosophy of going into war and fighting?
Didn't seem to conflict with anything. They were quite happy. They didn't have a problem with that. Unlike the Buddhists, no, they were very practical people. Somebody fired at them, they'd fire back at them, fire back. No, I've never really gone into the philosophy of what animists actually believe in, except that everything has spirit. Inert objects have spirit. No.
And where were their loyalties? Where were their loyalties tied to?
Politically or military?
Well, both politically and military.
I don't think they were anti the central government of Vietnam. their anti-North Vietnamese government. They were more, they had a sort of loose confederation of tribes which controlled this full row. Their loyalty was to their tribes. And they were very loyal to Mike Force until they got sold down the drain right at the end. What had happened that they were told they'd never have to serve in the South Vietnamese army because of and the Americans made a deal with the Vietnamese that they would relinquish control of Mike Force. It would come directly under South Vietnamese army control. And we were going out on operation, and they wouldn't go because everybody, to them, people had gone back on their word. So we were all asked to go down and talk to them, and was probably one of the proudest moments of my life. I went down, we talked to my mob, and they said, "All right, we'll go out on operation." And that was the only Australian-led company. And when I went back up to the headquarters report, I found my company was the only one would go out. Rest wouldn't back down. They were adamant they would never go on operations again. Anyway, they finally did. And the carrot was that the Americans said they'd reconsider the whole situation. And they went out on operation at Duck Shang, and I was coming home on R&R. They went out, and 2 days after, and I was going out R&R home on the third day. The proverbial hit the fan, a hell of a fight. We lost, Johnny Pettit was killed in one. Every Australian in the company was wounded, or one killed and the rest were all wounded. And I was running the ops centre waiting to go home, and the commander of the training team came up, Alex Clark, who lived in that, he died just recently. And he said, "How's it going?" I explained what was going on. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "He knew I was going on R&R. I said, "Well, I'm running the operations centre at the moment. The American captain there wasn't handling it too well." And I said, "But I've made arrangements to go back out tomorrow, and the chopper resupply, and take, back to the company." He said, "No, you're not. You're going home on R&R. I said, "No, I want to go back out to the company." He said, "You're going home on R&R. And I was very dark on him. Subsequently, a few years ago, I said, we were having a drink somewhere, I said, "I've got to apologise to you." I said, "When you told me I wasn't going back out in the field, I said, you weren't in my good books." I said, "But I'll thank you for it now, because he did me a good favour." But no, it was bad news. We lost a lot of people. We lost, of the company, we lost a third of them killed in one operation, 5 days. Went out with 144 and came back with about 70, I think it was. No, about 80.
That must have been quite distressing.
But we're talking about Long Tan earlier, and that was pretty. But when you consider some of the battles that were held up in the northern part, up in the 2 Corps, 1 Corps, it really was. It was just a skirmish. I mean, the American 173rd 1st Air Cav 7th Cavalry in the Ashau Valley in '65 killed 3,500 bodies on the ground of Vietnamese, and lost half a regiment. Long Tan, and it was nothing compared with that. There's some pretty horrendous things about it. Yeah. No, that was, but then again, as I said, it was a job. Something I trained all my life for. Look back at it now, I was thinking of the good times again, but no, I don't think I'd change it again. It was experience. Something a lot of people never have the opportunity or have to do.
Where were you when you heard the news of of how many were lost in that battle?
When I came back from R&R. And that was funny. I came back here. My wife had arranged for us to have one of the army holiday places at Goolwa. And so we went down there. And the day before I came back, came into town. I went to Coles, Woolworths, came over next to Johnny's. They had all these cheap pipes, all the Montyards, most of them smoke pipes, but they were very expensive. And the Vietnamese, all the traders, merchants were Vietnamese, Chinese, and they used to really rip them off. And I seen all these cheap pipes, and I said to the girl, I said, how many of them she got? She said, oh, I think there's 58 or something like that. She said, why? I said, well, I'm looking for about 100. She said, what for? I said, explain, I want to take them back to Vietnam for the next place. So she went and got the manager, he went out the store, and he came back. He'd found me 108 of them. He said, I said, thank you, how much of that? He said, you can have them all at cost. I thought that was great. I then went down to, who was it? Cowley? No, not Cowley's. One of the pie people. And bought 4 dozen meat pies. Had them all banded up. I carried 4 dozen meat pies from Adelaide on 3 different aircraft back to Pleiku. And we had a big pie party with the Americans. And but this bloke, you know, and that was 69. So the anti-Vietnam sentiment wasn't all that widespread. This bloke, you know, early 70s, sorry. And this bloke, you know, you can have them for a third of the price. No, cost it was, which was about a third of what they were asking for. Yeah, so.
And what happened to those pipes?
I gave them all the Montyard. They thought it was great. Actually, I gave them to my counterpart. I had a Montyard 2IC who acted as the administrator, and I gave them to him, and he sold them all for what was equivalent to 50 cents each, and the money went in the regimental fund, which I controlled anyway. So they weren't given; that wasn't just a giveaway. The money went to, and that money was used to go to dependents of people who've been killed in that. We used to have some funny things. For instance, as I said, with CIA finance, I had roughly 140 any one time in the company. I would draw pay for 150. That pay for the other 10 people would go to one side all the time, and because there was no system set up, if anyone was killed in action, we would give a gratia payment out of that to the family. It was the only way we could do it, and that was not under the counter. That was done deliberately. There was no way of doing it, so we did it that way. We also supplied full row. After every operation, at least half of the weapons in the company would go over the wire out of the compound into the Montyard, and we'd draw new weapons. The Vietnamese weren't supposed to know that. I'm sure they did, though. Oh, there were a lot of funny things going on.
Well, I'm just curious how, with so many different dialects.
I interpreted. I could make myself understood with the Radai and Jarai. But I had an interpreter could interpret. I had 2 interpreters. When I became a company commander, I had myself, the company 2IC was in Montyard. I had a number 1 radio man. I had a number 2 radio man who in actual fact was my bodyguard, watched my back all the time. And I had 2 interpreters. And no, we got by pretty well. But again, most of the stuff on operations was by sign. But they're all taught the Australian side signals. So I could go on operation and go through a whole operation virtually by giving directions by sign language. Some of the Yanks had problems with, actually.
I was going to ask you how the Americans handled their
Yeah, they did it, but nowhere near as easy as we did. Because we had the fortune that we actually ran the training company. Yeah. But They're lovely people. A chap called Barry Peterson and I had the same interpreter. And I didn't realise till I came back and I met Barry up at Canungra. I was up doing after I was commissioned at Admin School. And Barry mentioned the fact, I believe you had the same interpreter, local. I said, yeah. He said, well, he's escaped to Florida with his family and he's making action to bring him out to Australia. Barry had bought a block of flats in Brisbane and he was going to bring him out as a caretaker. He said, yeah, do you want to help? I said, by all means. So my job, I went around canvassing money and getting furniture and everything. We got all set up and the bloke decided he liked Florida better and he's still there. But it was interesting. This bloke had actually saved Barry Peterson's life.
What SAS techniques did you train the Montagnards with?
SAS techniques, none. It was basically operating as a normal infantry battalion. Well, I suppose we taught them some X and X, but nothing. Deliberately didn't go out to teach them. Mind you, I was the only bloke there at a lifetime that was ex-SAS. The rest would have been out of the battalions.
And being nomadic by nature, how did they handle the structure of the army?
Didn't seem to have any problems at all. One of the things that did happen, which was terrible in one respect, they had a chap, Montagnard, that lost both legs. He was in the camp, he was in a wheelchair, and they'd looked after him as much as possible. And one night we found out that he committed suicide. And this is how, we weren't expected to believe that. That was just the way. He'd put a rifle and pulled the trigger. Well, you can't do that with the length of it without using your toes or something like that. And he'd asked him to put him out of his misery because what's the good of a man in his tribe which is reasonably nomadic in a wheelchair in the Highlands? And I always thought that was very tragic. Hard to imagine. The only reason I could think of that they actually did it. I'm sure he asked them to do it.
You don't know that for sure?
No, but it certainly wasn't suicide. And there would be no other reason for it.
Alan, before we go on, I want to hear more about mobile strike. But one thing that we didn't talk about, and I think it is important to touch on, because Mike Force was American run, I'd just like to go back again and talk about, I guess, the difference in the way that the American Special Forces were run compared to Australian from your first tour.
Oh, very good. That's very interesting, actually, because I think I briefly said in the first tour I went up to Narrabri for a short while. They were running what they call Reconnaissance course, Reconnaissance Commando course. And we went up there because we ran them back in Australia. And somebody had said, we're running them, would you like to send a couple of blokes up to observe? So we went up there and I went out on a patrol with one of these blokes, with a group of these blokes, and it was they had 6 men on it. And they are reasonably well trained up to a level. But the idea was when they went out, instead of doing what we do at night, they found a big tree, 6 of them. They all sat with their back to the tree and ran a cord around so they could, like a signal cord, and all stayed awake at night taking no dose tablets. So the following morning when we were at first light and we were ready to move off again, I said, no, we're not. Said, what do you mean? I said, if you think I'm going to stay out here for another 4 days with you doing this, you've got another thing coming. I said, that's dangerous. So we went back. But that's some of the things they did. Other things they were very good at. There's no comparison between them and our SAS. The only mob that they have that even remotely like SAS here or Brits is their SEALs, which are Navy. But their special forces are far better than the rest of the army, but they're still nowhere near as good as our mob. And that's not just being parochial.
Well, can you expand on why you say that?
No, not really. It's just so many intangibles. It's just things they just aren't as good at doing. Their patrolling techniques are nowhere near as good as our blokes. Most of them can't map read would get lost in the middle of Rundle Mall. That's not right, but they're nowhere near as good. We concentrate a lot on map reading, a hell of a lot. And the amount of times that I've been out in operation, and especially with Mike Force, and the company commander or a platoon commander of the American thing, I said, God damn it, where am I? I said, well, where do you think you are? And he explained. I said, well, you got this and that? Look at the map. No, I said, well, you're not there. They had a difficult reading the topography on the map. We learned to the extent that it was you know much about map reading? But, well, you know the grids on a map. You get that way that you could actually work with a grid. You're on that downward slope with that creek hanging around there. And you can actually pinpoint exactly where you were. But they would be lucky if they'd be within 500 yards of where they're actually supposed to be. Not all of them. Some of them were good, but generally speaking, most of our blokes were pretty good at it. Because we concentrate. And when you do a small reconnaissance group, you've got to be smack on with map reading. So we no, I can't think of any individual things, but apart from that, but suffice to say, I don't, having worked with both, I don't think there's any much comparison. Their Delta force is quite good, but that's counter-terrorists altogether. Yeah.
Well, back with Mike Force, it was American run.
Run by, run out of headquarters of 5th Special Forces in Vietnam was at Nha Trang. Pleiku had what they call the B camp, which is next echelon. Then the A camp is, the A team is we were a B team. It was Mike Force. Then the Special Forces had what they call A teams. And this is what Mike Force was designed for. All along the border of Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos, they had these A camps set up. They were fortified hilltops normally, where you had a Special Forces A team, which consisted of 2 officers and 8 NCOs, or sergeants. They had in there what they called a strike force, or strikers, which consisted of, could be Vietnamese, Montagnards, or whatever, depending on what area they're in. They could have, say, between 300, 500 strikers in this camp. And their idea was to patrol around there and hold that area so the North Vietnamese army couldn't infiltrate. What happened on a periodic rate, the North Vietnamese would attack these A camps, and you'd have about 2 or 3 North Vietnamese army regiments attacking an A camp. When that happened, Mike Force's job was to go in and bash their way through and relieve the A camps, and try and get the NVA out, or hit them before they could get in. Which in theory was very good, except in most cases we were outnumbered and outgunned too, so it didn't make it. But the fact that you got somebody coming from a different angle it helped. The first one I went into was a place called Bu Prang. It was an A camp right on the tri-border area, the border of Vietnam coming down there, border of Laos, Vietnam there, and it was virtually right there. That had been attacked. It was under heavy attack, and it had taken a lot of artillery rounds from across the border from Laos, and the whole camp had virtually been flattened, anything above deck. We chop it in, I can't remember how many kilometres out, then we went in. The reason I'm mentioning this is because you're talking about the South Vietnamese and Montagnards running. We got to inside of the A camp, and we were on a crest of a hill, which was, well, like Adelaide Hills, tree lines around. Between us and the A camp and the airstrip, there was another hill line which was a bit lower. While we were there, it was unbelievable. There was a North Vietnamese unit in one side, one of the hill, and a South Vietnamese Ranger battalion on the other side. And it was like watching a movie. The North Vietnamese army came out in an extended line with fixed bayonets up over the hill and charged down at the South Vietnamese, at Rangers. Right? Now the Rangers came out of the creek line with fixed bayonets and actually had a bayonet fight in the open ground. Didn't last very long. The North Vietnamese went back to their side and the argument there. Now you wouldn't get an Australian battalion doing that either. We didn't believe it. Following morning we were going to move down into the A camp. It was a bit to our right. And lo and behold, the ARVN, the Ranger Battalion, came out and did the same thing, and the North Vietnamese come out and attacked them. And people say that they wouldn't fight. The ARVN and Montagnard were like anyone else. If they were officered well, they fought well, and they were looked after. But some of their officers were absolutely, the political appointees are out to make as much money as they wanted to. And I would suggest some of these American units that had Montagnards, that had Americans or something. If they ran, I would say it's a reflection on whoever's running the company, quite frankly. Does that make sense?
And where was were you watching this when you were being airlifted?
No, we were moving into the A camp. And the A camp was there, we were there, and this tree hill there. And it was just like watching a movie. The long red thin line or whatever it is. And to this day, I don't know what happened to either unit, because we moved through into the A camp, relieved that, all the artillery had stopped at that stage. The airstrip had a long line of body bags along that, I remember that, I've never seen so many in all my life. But most of them have been killed by small arms fire, by rifle fire and that. The amount of artillery on this A camp, it completely flattened everything on top. All you see was the trenches. And not one person had been killed by artillery fire. So the moral of the question, if you're ever anywhere and you're under artillery fire, go underground, you're pretty safe. Not one person was killed by artillery fire or by small arms fire.
And who were in those body bags?
They would have been all strikers. I think there was three of them. 2 of the Americans were killed and I think 1 wounded. They would have all been. I think they were probably a mixture of Cambodians and Yards in there, Montagnards. I can't really remember, to tell the truth, who the garrison of the camp was. Yeah. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, wherever possible, always took their bodies away with them. They were very good for that. But I think the main reason was that so you didn't know how many casualties they had. I don't think it was for humanitarian reasons, but just intelligence sort of thing. Yeah, so that was my first operation with Mike Force. It was an eye-opener, I tell you.
Well, what did you do when you moved into
we just secured the camp and sent patrols out the other side to make sure the North Vietnamese hadn't actually left the area. Nothing else you could do at that stage.
And what's involved in securing the camp?
Well, in this case, the North Vietnamese had started to move away, so we didn't actually come into contact with them at that stage. We had minor contacts beforehand. In fact, each time we moved forward, we had a contact and we'd clear it, and we go into another contact. It was just repetition until we got the A camp. But we didn't have any major conflict. They'd all started to move away. But ordinarily, if they'd still been attacking, we would have communicated with the A camp and worked out the best way of trying to relieve the pressure on the camp. Probably if the camp's there and the Vietnamese are attacking there, we'd probably come in the side, something like that. Depends on the scenario. But I think I said before, one of the big weaknesses of the Vietnamese NVA and Viet Cong, especially the NVA, is their lack of communications. They only had radios from, say, the battalion commander back up to the high headquarters. So every time they developed an attack, they had to develop it on the ground, train it, and that's the way the attack went in. And it went in the same way, same method every time, because that's how they trained their soldiers. They couldn't deviate because there was no way of telling someone to do something different. They just had to, once they were committed, and it was a big weakness with them. They lost a lot of people doing it that way. But they were very dedicated, give them that.
And why were you surprised to see what you saw when you arrived at that camp? What?
In what respect?
Well, the NVA, the long line of NVA with bayonets drawn.
Oh, well, I'd like everybody else. I'd heard about the fact of, you hear these stories about the Vietnamese won't fight. You know, they always back off a fight. This mob certainly did. Mind the Rangers were supposed to be one of the better units, but even so, it was quite enlightening. I'd never seen anything like it, and I'll never see anything like it again. But it was like watching a movie. Two strangers flashing. I would suspect, and I don't know, I would suspect that they were pretty short on ammunition, both sides at the time. Otherwise, as one attacked, the other one would have probably ripped in them with the few shots fired, as far as we know. And it was fairly fair in the distance. But I'd say they were their resupply was short. They were both almost out of ammo, which is probably one of the reasons the NVA had started to call their assault of the camp off. Though it was very close to the border, their resupply still very tenuous. But one of the problems, of course, is as I said, they had artillery support. We didn't have any. We didn't have air support because it was all clouded in. One of the problems of working in the Highlands is you couldn't always call on air support, on airstrikes, because the aircraft couldn't fly in the Highlands in that weather. Choppers were okay, but not the fighters. Yeah, that was interesting.
Well, I imagine it would have been quite unusual to see a line of NVA with bayonets drawn.
I never heard anyone else ever seen anything like it. There's myself, Johnny Vincent, Alex McCloskey is since dead. Ray Barnes is now dead. I think there was only two of us there that seen it. I and the Montyards, of course. God knows where they are. Yeah.
And you mentioned it was short-lived, but...
Oh, yeah, it didn't last very long. I'm not surprised. Most actions don't. Most actions are instantaneous and it might seem like it goes on for hours, but in actual fact it only goes on for half a minute or something. The next minute you fall back or something. Yeah. You can only carry so much ammunition to start with. Which is one of the reasons having fully automatic weapons is not a good idea unless you want to get out of an ambush.
Well, that was your first operation.
Mm.
How many of the other operations were like that one?
Oh, Ben Het was similar. Ben Het, they had actually, that was the only time that I know of the NVA used tanks. They used 3 tanks, and they all got knocked out. But I only got in there right at the end of that. The rest of it was mainly trying small contacts, so forth. That was a major on Duck Shang, which I didn't get out to. Most of it was small stuff, you know, platoons striking into another platoon of NVA, you clear the contact. One that sticks very much in mind was I'd got a call that a company had been in a heavy contact, been attacked actually in a thing, and it had to get out. The NVA, and I was asked, I wasn't very far away, I was asked if I could go in there because they'd lost, I think, about 5 Montagnards. One of them being a radio operator with a radio on his back. Now, that was very important because you had to try and keep that sort of stuff out of the NVA's hands. So I was asked to go in and see whether I could recover the bodies and the thing. When I got there, it was on the other side of a big clearing, and we took fire. They'd only just moved in at the same time. We could see them moving in. So I thought, well, no way in the world we're going to go across there. We'll just lose too many people. And we carried these M72s, so a light anti-tank weapon, fiberglass. You just extend them. We carried them 2 per section. Now, why we carried them, I don't know. We always carried them with SOP, Standard Operation Procedure. We carried these. We never used them. And I looked at this thing, I thought, yeah, so we got one of these laws, and I got somebody to just aim it at a big tree. Of course, the weapon projectile went off, hit the tree, and of course, splinters everywhere. Oh, this is great. So we had every light anti-tank weapon in the company aimed at these trees and fired all at once, and there's splinters everywhere, and they all fed the meat army when it was like shrapnel. So these things we've been carrying around for months, never used, actually had a purpose, not the purpose I designed for. We went over there, and the 5 bodies were still there. The radio set was there. They hadn't had a chance to pick it up, so it was successful. But I found another use for a light anti-tank weapon anyway. Yeah. The little things like that made life interesting. Yeah. But there was nothing else of earth-shaking kind of. Most of it was routine, small contacts, clearing the contacts. You know, you'd lose some people, you know, a couple of people sometime. You'd have a bit of a wind, kill some of them. And the only other thing I can think of is we were in an area, and we'd been under a fair bit of light fire, a lot of contact, small contacts, and we were being resupplied by chopper, and this was quite horrendous, I suppose. I want a better word. And there was choppers, helicopters from the American 4th Division, bringing our rations and ammunition. What hadn't been told, the Americans hadn't been told that they were resupplying Montagnards, or indigenous people. Anyway, when they came in, they started throwing the packages out on the ground, and the side gunner on one of these choppers was a big black buck. Seen all, and I went, you know, this section of blokes went forward to get all the thing. He opened up on an M60 and knocked half the section off. Because nobody had told him, he thought he'd been attacked, nobody had told him he wasn't supplying American troops. Fortunately, he didn't kill one bloke. Half the section got knocked down, were all wounded, but all recovered. Couldn't have blamed him because he wasn't told. He was just told they're going to resupply a unit. And when he got there, we seen all these little Asians rushing towards him with their weapons. He thought he was in trouble. So, but in one way, very, very unfortunate, but in one way, very, very lucky. I think the worst scenario, I think one bloke actually lost his pinky, his little finger. But the rest of them all had wounds, but were all fixed up. But we didn't even report it. We told them that suggested next time that they inform their troops what they're going to do and who they're supplying. We didn't say that we had 5 wounded. Wasn't going to prove anything or help anything. Yeah, but those sort of things. I mean, you can understand why accidents happen in war, like Iraq. You know, our own troops getting hit by American airplane. I mean, these things happen. Doesn't matter how much you train for it. You're always going to have the problem of somebody just not doing the right thing at the right time. Anyway, it worked out well in the long run, but it could have been quite disastrous.
And how often was friendly fire a problem?
It's the only time it ever happened to me. I nearly had an aircraft land these bombs on top of me. I had a forward air controller, and we'd pop smoke. And anyway, this bloke was coming down on a drop his bombs, and I could see him. He was over in the wrong place, and I just yelled out to the fact, check. And this bloke pulled him up, and he didn't drop his bombs. But I mean, they may have missed me anyway. I missed us anyway. But when you're travelling at that speed, it's also very quick. I mean, it's so easy to make a mistake. It's all very easy to point the finger, you know, in retrospect. Still, I'm here.
And the operations with Mike Force, you mentioned that you were choppered in the first time. Was that the case for all the other?
Yeah. We choppered. No. There was only one time we walked out. There was nothing. Everything was pretty quiet at the time. We did a big patrol of the area around Play Coup, and we walked out on that. We did out for about a week, and that was nothing. That was just. The only other thing I can really think of interest is we had a warning that the NVA were moving in on a village, Montiano village, which was about 80 miles south west of Play Coup. And I was given a job. We were on the ground already, of going in and clearing the village, moving all the villages to a safe area. So we got the village and we called the choppers in. The choppers all came in, and we loaded the villages in it. Then and an element of the company, and sent them off to Play Coup, one after another. The last chopper came, and I'm still on the ground, of course. And there was about 4 villages, I think. One of them was a pregnant woman and her husband and her mother, and her other child. That's right. My company headquarters, we went to get on the aircraft because everybody on first, and I get on. There's no room, so I'm standing on the skids. We take off, and that's not really a problem. You hand on. I mean, it's no different than just sitting on the side. They don't. And next minute, this woman started giving birth. She's kicking, and everybody in there's going like that. And I'm ducking around on the side there. It was the most uncomfortable ride on a helicopter I've ever had in my life. I'm glad to get on the ground. Don't recommend it. I'll never forget that. And the baby was a boy, and it was named Buxy, which is medic. It was Vietnamese for medic. And I always remember that part. What happened to it after that, I have no idea. Yeah. But she was, I do remember that, she was very unusual. She was a Vietnamese married to a Montagnard. And I've never seen it anywhere else. Well, I assume she's married. I mean, they were a family. but it's the only time I've ever seen it. I think she probably may have been a morphin that was brought up by him or something like that, but yeah, she was. Because normally they didn't have a lot to do with each other, as did the Chinese and the Vietnamese in Vietnam. Yeah. Next.
Well, from that story,
What?
the chopper sounds like it was overloaded slightly.
Well, it wasn't overloaded weight; it was just overloaded in room. The fact that the poor woman was lying down sort of took up a fair bit of room. I mean, at that stage of the game, I thought we were going to get. I didn't have another chopper anyway. It was the last chopper, so I think would have been myself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 9. 9 one round I and 8 Vietnamese would normally fit the chopper easily. But when she got on, she just collapsed. I didn't have any room to get in there. But I mean, that wasn't a problem. I mean, no harm standing on the skids going out back. It's just that every now and then an arm or a leg would sort of dash out from the cab while they're trying to get her comfortable, and I was ducking them. But no, it was quite good. But she finished up okay. But I don't know what happened in the long run.
And what was the general kind of Vietnamese attitude towards the Australians?
I don't know. I think it depends again on the Australians and on the Vietnamese. When Mike Force finished up, I went down to start the MAT 2 up, which was the second mobile. I lived in a compound with a regional force company, which the company commander, incidentally, had fought with the French at Dien Bien Phu, and the 2IC of the company had fought with the Viet Minh at Dien Bien Phu, and they were both very good friends. The fact he was Vietnamese wasn't that he was a communist; he was a nationalist. Anyway, I was extremely pleased. Every morning the Vietnamese would get up there and they have a little parade and fly their national flag. And I think we'd been in there about a month and a half. And the company commander came over and asked me if I would like to fly the Australian flag with them in the morning. And I'd never heard of that happening before. They normally wouldn't do it. And that was very embarrassing, because I then had to try and get an Australian flag, and I couldn't get one anywhere. I formally applied to the task force through the headquarters AFE for an Australian flag. Couldn't get one. I finished up getting one. We stole one from the Australian Logistics Support Group down at Wong Town. But officially, I couldn't get one because it's not on the establishment of the team. You can't have one. And I had to apologise every morning for the fact my flag hadn't arrived. We really do some stupid things. I suppose the silliest thing I did was saying, yes, thank you very much, it's been nice, but I haven't got a flag. He wouldn't have understood that. One thing the Vietnamese are extremely nationalistic. Doesn't matter what side they're on. They're extremely nationalistic. They believe in the country. Even the ones that come over here on hand, they all wear the Vietnamese flag, the old Vietnamese flag on their tie. You can't knock them for that. But I got a flag, and we fly it.
Well, just going back to the Mike Force.
Yep.
Why was it that Mike Force was being disbanded?
Because the Americans made this deal with the Vietnamese that they would hand over complete control of Mike Force, what they call CIDG, Civil or Regular Defence Group troops, to the South Vietnamese Army. And this was going back on a promise they'd made the Montagnards. And that was when they wouldn't go out on the operation initially. They then said they'd rethink it, and they went out. that when they came back, it was fait accompli. The Vietnamese started moving in, and we moved out. Easy as that. Great friends, the Vietnamese, the Americans, when they want to be.
And how did you respond to this news?
I thought it was very underhanded, quite frankly. We weren't very happy at the all, but nothing we could do about it. Nothing we could do about it. But it happened. I've never really ever heard of what the aftermath was, what happened when they're under control. I don't think it would have worked because the Montagnards wouldn't have worked for the Vietnamese. I would say they were gradually just went back to the hills with their weapons. Anyway, so that was folding up. We were looking, we went up to, we didn't have a date at that stage. We went up to Da Nang for Australia Day in 1970 for celebration. Anzac Day, Australia. And to find out the day before that the Prime Minister in Parliament, without any consultation with the training team of defence or headquarters AFV, said the training team will have MAT teams operating in Phuoc Tuy province by the 5th of May. And we didn't have anyone to go in them. So the few of us were in MAT, were going to leave Pleiku anyway. We're suddenly given jobs. I can't remember where MAT 1, I had MAT 2. I started that up, we went down there, no equipment. We had 2 warrant officers. We were 4 corporal volunteers from the task force were sent attached to the training team. We had personal weapons. Anyway, so we got down there, and I'd still contact with them. They were starting to pack up a lot of the gear in Pleiku at Mike Force. So I contacted the mate up there with the S4, the supply officer. I said, what do you got on the store that I can put on? He said, come up and pick. So I went up to their store. The store was as big as this building in this block in square in. Had machine guns, fridges, everything you possibly want, radios. He said, help yourself. So I just went through with a shopping trolley type thing, radio down to Saigon, said send up an aircraft. They said, what do you want, a Caribou? I said, no, send a C-130, a Hercules. This Hercules came up and we loaded about 10 big kerosene fridges, 50 M60s, everything. Radios, and that's how the Australian Army set up their MAT teams. The Yanks just turned a blind eye, said, take what you want. We really do live on a shoestring. And that's all very unofficial too, my man. No, everybody knows about it now, I suppose.
Well, it's a long time down the track.
Yeah, nobody's going to worry about it. Yeah. Go on.
So where were you based then?
What, when we went to Pleiku, down at Phuoc Tuy, Dat Do. They had a compound with a regional force company at Dat Do. They had one at another village out to the east of there, and one south. You know what an RF company is?
Tell us anyway.
A regional force company. They were almost like our full CMF for full time, but they were only supposed to be used, same uniform, everything else as the Army Republic of Vietnam, but they were only supposed to be used in their own province, very much like the American National Guard. So I had three companies of them and 22 what they call popular force platoons, which were little 20 or between 18 and 30 in little hamlets around the area who were issued with M1, M2 carbines. They were really ineffective. So we were down there, trained them, went on operations with them. I think the only, well, two things I really remember about that, apart from the training aspect with them, was that when I went on an operation in an area called the Long Green, and we dropped in there, the suspected Viet Cong camp in there, and we walked straight into a big swamp, which we didn't know. It didn't show up on the maps. It was all covered in trees, and we were in there for 9 hours, up to there in swamp, under and over trees. You couldn't drink the water; it was foul. And at the end of it, we were carrying blokes out, and we got too far. We didn't know when it was going to end. We got out of it, and I'll never forget this. And right in front of us was a wild cucumber patch, bloody big cucumber patch, and I've never seen so many cucumbers eaten in such a quick time. I love cucumbers instantly now, but if you're ever thirsty and you see cucumbers, again, luck, just happened to come out right where this cucumber patch was. There's no other water in the area, so that got out. And I had a meeting of the 3 company commanders one day, and we decided, and something came up, and I hadn't realised that each of these companies had a intelligence cell attached to it, about a 5-man intelligence group. I said, what do they do? And the company said, not much. I said, well, why don't you get them out there and do something? 2 days later, they contacted me. They'd found a tunnel complex right in the middle of that doe. We sent a group in to cordon the area, threw a smoke grenade down one of the trapdoors, and next minute the Viet Cong started coming out. I thought, this is great. The best coup they've had in the area for ages. Anyway, the last person to come out was a woman, and as she came out, she was up to her waist, and somebody said, grenade. She had a grenade in her hand, and she just dropped it down in front of her. Anyway, it went off. They dragged her out, and she had lost an eye, part of her hand, pretty well lacerated all around, and she was in a bad way. And I said to my team medic, I said, look, do what you can do to, stabilise her. And he just stood there frozen. This is an Australian young corporal from the task force. Anyway, the Vietnamese, Buxley was the medic, quick as a flash, straight in there and put 200 Ks on. I called for a chopper to come in, which I shouldn't have really done, considering who she was. Anyway, the chopper came in, we put her on, sent her down to Longtown to the hospital. That afternoon I got a big rocket from the American major in charge of the district for bringing in a chopper for this Viet Cong. A day later, I was asked to come around. An apology and a letter of commendation. It turned out this woman was the deputy commander of all the Viet Cong in Phuoc Tuy province. So instead of being a nasty, I was the hero. Again, I never worked out what happened to her either. I don't even know whether she survived. But that worked well. But that corporal, we got back to the team house, and I said, "Take your bags. I'm sending you back to the task force."
So just picking up on that incident, what happened to that corporal?
Oh, I told him I'm sending him back to the task force, which stage the others in the team, except the other warrant officer, my 2IC, got very upset about it, that I was sacking him. I said, look, I couldn't care a damn, he's going back, and we'll get somebody else. When he'd actually left, I sat them all down and said, listen, just imagine if it had been you wounded, and I told him to fix you and he just froze, what would you do? What would you think then? From that stage on, they were all okay with it. But no, I couldn't afford to keep him around. You can't afford it. Next time he may have done what he's supposed to do, but you can't take the risk. I'd hate to be wounded and somebody just looks at you like it's done mullet, They don't afraid to do what they're supposed to do. All right, so he went back and I got another one. Easy as that.
The Viet Cong were quite notorious for their underground networks. Did you come across that quite often?
No, only once personally, and that was this time in Dat Do. I gather, I never actually went down into it, but I gather it was pretty extensive. But it was interesting, it was right in the middle of a village that was supposed to be reasonably friendly. But then again, most of them were supposed to be reasonably friendly until they went the other way. No, it was the only one I actually contacted. First two we contacted them in caves in the mountains, but that was only once too. But undoubtedly I was in an area where there were tunnels, but we never found them, never seen them.
Just going back to digress back to your SAS tour, when you were out doing reconnaissance patrols, what signs would you look for tunnel networks or the openings to tunnels?
Almost anything that'd give you a hint it was there. A lot of their tunnels, I believe, and again I haven't actually started that in under hamlets and that. So they could put them under beds and under mats and all that sort of stuff. Some of them had escape traps out in the jungle and that. But no, I never, not personally, never come in contact with them. I know the task force certainly did. They found tunnels, but I never went. I never was anyone that did.
Well, moving back to the Mobile Advisory Training Team, MAT 2, could you explain to me what their role was?
Well, you had twofold, I suppose, really. One was to advise the company commander and the officers on operations. We actually went out with them on all their operations and to physically train them. Try and if there was anything they were deficient on or needed further training, is to advise them on the training capability. Sometimes we actually train themselves, or other times we trained to set their NCOs so they'd train them. But that's the way we normally did it. But it worked quite well. The company commander of the company I was co-located, I actually lived with, he was very responsive, a lovely chap. His wife was and young family. He wasn't a young man by any stretch of the imagination. As I said, he'd fought in the Vietnam Pew with the French. So that was in 54. So, yeah, going back a bit.
And what training did you, well, what areas did you notice or flag that needed further training?
Oh, basically just minor infantry tactics, patrol techniques. I mean, they'd tend to go out on patrol, they'd all be all closed up and so forth, so one round would probably hit about 3 people. But just generally tidying up the fact that they'd be use proper patrol techniques, they'd right grouping, they'd have, and ambush. We'd go out and ambush and make sure that they set an ambush up properly, because their idea of an ambush in some cases would just go out, plop on the ground and wait for someone to come along. I mean, half the time you could see them before you even got there. But that type of thing. Bit of demolitions, but not much. And once I found out about this intelligence group, we worked on that a fair bit to get the intelligence going, and that was very successful. I was very happy with that. And
what did you do with the intelligence group?
We fed that back into task force, into the district. One of the reasons I must admit, I forgot to mention that when I got the big rocket from the senior advisor, American advisor, about this Vietnamese, this tunnel business, wasn't just because I called in a chopper to bring her out, and that turned out to be right, but the fact that I underwent the operation without any reference that was in my area to the district headquarters. I didn't let anyone know what was going on. And I did it deliberately, because nearly everything that went through, you didn't know who was going to find out about it. So we just did it without letting them know, and it was never compromised. And I think they were a little bit embarrassed that, well, they were more than upset that I did it, but I think the proof was in the pudding that if I'd told them I was going to do a coordinate search in that area where that tunnel was, you could have bet by the time we got there wouldn't have been a Vietnamese in the tunnel. The fact that we didn't tell them, we caught them.
Where were these leaks coming from?
Oh, could be anywhere. I mean, you never know, never knew who was who. You used to work on a principle in any one Vietnamese unit, at least 5% were Vietnamese, Viet Cong, or Viet Cong sympathisers. And bearing in mind, they didn't have to particularly sympathise with them. A lot of them gave information because they were coerced. Their families were threatened. They were threatened. I mean, you really couldn't blame them in a lot of cases. But you could bet that anything you put through the normal channels would get back to the other side. But this particular time it didn't, because we didn't tell anyone. I was told, however, that it would be advisable if I didn't do it again. I was going home at that stage, it didn't really worry me.
So what other work did you do with the intelligence arm?
I just generally got them out working. We got a lot of good little things. We had one case of the Viet Cong were setting. In fact, this could have been very serious. The task force, the battalion that was stationed at a place called the Horseshoe, a little hill up there road. The company there from the battalion used to come into our compound at night, staged there to almost last night, then they'd move out into an area for an ambush. I got a bit of trouble there because when they were doing it, they weren't doing it right. They were wandering down the road and close together with the tool taught not to. And I said to the RSM of the battalion, I said, listen, I'm trying to teach the Vietnamese one thing, and here's your blokes coming doing exactly what I'm telling them not to do. Next minute I had the battalion commander down saying, don't tell me how to run my battalion, which backfired on him, because their intel mob had got information, and we went out just before one of these ambush patrols, and they went out the same route every night, which is again something you're taught never to do. And find an ambush position already set up with a homemade claymore made out of molted together TNT and PE with bolts and nuts in it, set up with a detonator, ready to ambush this Australian patrol. And we discovered it before they got there. So we gently brought the patrol commander down to have a look what he was about to walk into. He went all white. They called the ambush off, went back. The following day, Ron Gray, who happened to be the battalion commander, had to go at me for telling his company, battalion, what to do, came down and apologised in front of everybody. And then blew hell out of his operations major for letting it get to that stage. But he wasn't there, he didn't know what they were doing, they were just going out doing their own thing. So that could have been quite messy. But that was directly through the what this intel group had picked up. I really can't think of anything other major that they did, but they certainly started to get around and try and find things out, which previously they didn't do anything.
I expect it would have been a very frustrating time to try and coordinate these troops.
What, for them?
Well, for yourself as well.
Oh, yeah. No, not really. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was good fun. I mean, and they really got into the scheme of things themselves. Once they were given the bit of a boot up the rear end, a bit of impetus to get out and do things, you could actually see their whole attitude change to the fact that somebody thought they could do something and they went out and did it, or tried to do it. So I was quite pleased it worked quite well. And the company commander thought it was great because his company had a major achievement, and the first thing that happened, the place for a fair while. Yes, no, it was great.
What did you enjoy the most about that job?
Which job?
The working with Matt too.
Oh, I think it was all. Nothing I can really pinpoint as the best aspect of it. It was quite good. But I think that, as I said before, I think probably the most satisfying part of career in my whole career was running a company on operations up in out of Pleiku. That was a culminant. But no, it was good down there. I mean, again, I was my own boss. You know, I had myself and another warrant officer, the 4 corporals, and all the 3 RF companies and so forth. So no, that was quite satisfying. But at that stage, I was glad to get home after that.
How long were you with Matt too?
I can't remember. I think it must have been about 5, 6 months. I think about 5 months. I think it was August for. Oh, hang on, May. No, May. I was home in October. I would have been home in August, except they had the big parade for Westmoreland to give the training team the citation. And instead of coming home in August, I stayed for the big parade and came home. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier today about the dat-do dogs.
That day.
Dat-do, sorry.
It was a standard joke. I mean, in the old days in the task force in 66, 67, the whole idea was that standard joke is, what are you going to do tonight? I mean, nothing. You couldn't do anything. I mean, you either go to the boozer or sit and play card or whatever. And so let's go to the dat-do dogs. It was a standard joke. So when I took over and started this MAT team up in dat-do, I sent a circular up to a few people I knew in fact, the squadron that was up in the SAS squadron, and a few other people I knew, and inviting them down to the dat-do dogs, which would be held. And we had it on a Saturday during the day. I mean, dat-do dogs were supposed to be at night, of course. And I had, we'd actually taken in as a pet, a little puppy. So we all got down there and we had the dat-do dog, and we all got stuck into the grog. Had an afternoon to remember, but that was the dat-do dogs. I thought everybody been talking about the dat-do dogs, we'd set one up, and that was it. That was yeah. But I mean, it's like saying going to the Melbourne Cup, you're not going, sort of thing. You know, that's all it is.
How often did the dat-do dogs?
Oh no, that was only the one, just as a stir. Yeah, it was only a one only. If I could have thought of a way of making up dog races, I probably would have done it. That's what dogs weren't already in the pot.
What other, I don't want to sound corny in calling them morale building exercises, but what other things did you do to try and keep spirits high?
Amongst my people, the Vietnamese.
Well, I mean, I expect they would have been different for both.
Yeah, quite considerably. Vietnamese, wherever possible, especially, I used to try and con as much gear as I could to make their life. Bear in mind, they had their families in the compound too, and they lived in holes in the ground virtually, in bunkers, the families. I used to try and get as much stuff as I could, con out of the Americans of the task force, to make their life a little bit better, a little bit more pleasant. And I think they appreciate it. We had volleyball competitions against the Vietnamese and all, yeah. No, they seemed to, don't think anyone got despondent, but well, pretty happy actually. But not a hell of a lot you could do. You're either stuck in the compound or out on operations, out patrolling.
And what did you do for your men?
Well, we had a team house that would have almost make like home and country. We had two big carrier fridges. We'd conned all this stuff. We had tables made up. We had all these little cookers made under our arc, and we had things like culinary every day when there was an operation on, somebody was given the job of coming up with a different type of dish. You know, and some of the things you ate were absolutely revolting. Some of them were very good too. But no, there's, as I said, we foster competition between our blokes and the Vietnamese. One of the things that I think the Vietnamese appreciated, they didn't have any fresh water. They had to go a fair way to get water. All the women used to go down there, and I managed to get hold of a tanker, big tank, bring it in, set it up. I had a truck for the task force come down every now and then and fill it up with water, and that was a great boon for them. But no, we set up a canteen, which was for use by the team and the Vietnamese. No, it was, and as I said, the peace resistance really was the Esprit was when they asked us we'd like to fly our flag. When I finally got the flag, they had armed, both flags got together, and we'd have my group lined up and the Vietnamese on the other side. I got a couple of good shots of that, and it was quite, but no, it was something, you know, with both flags flying together. But to be actually asked to fly the flag was quite a compliment, I thought. I was very pleased and surprised. But what you could do for in that sort of environment to raise morale is just to make sure everybody's spirits are right and everybody gets a fair share of the work and nobody's laying on. No, it worked all right. Well, it did for me anyway. I don't know how it did for everyone else. And we had the added advantage, I suppose. We had two other MAT teams started up a few miles away, and we actually helped advise them and help them in setting up their teams and building their compound. So the blokes were busy all the time, and I mean, the worst thing you do is have them just sitting around moping. So we didn't have any of that problem. Yeah. So when I went home, they all seemed to be pretty happy with the life. And again, I don't know what happened after.
And what was it like saying goodbye to Vietnam?
Oh, all right. I really can't remember. I just remember packing my bags, going to Saigon, getting on a plane, coming home. I really can't think of anything out of the ordinary.
Saying goodbye to anyone?
Well, we had a few tearful farewells from the Vietnamese company that I was actually living with. The CA's wife and a lot of the NCA's wives, families were very seemed very, very sad to see me go, which was nice in a way. But no, I was quite happy. I mean, the job had been done. I was prepared to go home. I went home. That was it. Went home. I got posted. We finished with Vietnam.
I don't know. I think so. Yeah.
I got posted. They posted me back to here, Adelaide, for the first time I'd ever had a home posting. And they didn't have a job for me anywhere, so they made me supernumerary as the assistant command signals officer at Keswick. I was there for a year, and I got a phone call saying, would I like to go to Singapore? I said, oh, yeah, what's the job? I said, it's Staff Officer 3, captain's job is in Singapore, headquarters Anzac Force. I said, oh, I've been asked my wife, so I asked Margaret. She said, oh, yeah, when we go? I said, I don't know, they didn't tell me that. So I rang Canberra back. They said, oh, we want you to go in 10 days. And we just moved back into a new home with everything else. Wife and daughter hadn't had any shots. I said, oh, and I rang her Margaret up and said, can you do it in 10 days? Anyway, it all went. We went to Singapore, or Hubba, very hush, because they needed me there urgently. Got there, went into a hotel, rang up the headquarters Anzac Force. Oh, we weren't expecting you for 3 weeks. So we stayed in the hotel for 2 weeks while they found us a house. We stayed there for just over 2 years. That was very enjoyable.
Can you explain to me what the Anzac Force was?
Australian, New Zealand, United Kingdom Force, the composite force under the joint agreement with Singapore and Malaysia. Previously, it was a Commonwealth brigade, predominantly run by the Brits. The British Navy was in Singapore. The Brits got out, and ANZAC, Australian, New Zealand, United Kingdom, composite force that took over from the Brits. So we had an ANZAC Navy, Army, Air Force, we had UK, New Zealand, Australia, all in different units. And
what was your role in Singapore?
I was the SAS3 telecommunications. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? I was responsible. It was the first time I'd ever been back in a purely signals job in the Army after being in for so many years. And I was responsible for all the telephone communications, switchboards, PABXs, everything on Singapore. Bearing in mind that the Singapore Telephone Board hired all their cables off the Brits. Because the Brits built everything and it was a naval base. We took that over, and I had to set up a miniature telecom. I had my sales staff. We supplied telephones to the married quarters, the houses. We lines and PABXs to the Singapore Telephone Board. Oh, it was a great job. I went in there. I worked 11 months, 6 days a week, from about 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. And I went in one day, and the Chinese girl, Maureen, was running the accounts and so forth. Somebody else was running installations, all the PABXs. I sat at my desk. I thought, what the hell am I going to do now? Everything had just fallen into place. So I went to the chief signal officer. There was a bloke called Neil Connor, a colonel, Australian colonel. I said, look, I think I've worked myself out of a job. He said, I know. He said, well, I've been watching. And I said, what do you want me to do now? He said, come in. He said, I'd say by 10 o'clock any faults have been fixed up. He said, and the pool by the mess, down at the mess, looks very appetising. He said, just so I know where you are. For the rest of the 2 years, I used to come in, sit around about 10 o'clock, go down to the mess for lunch, go to the pool in the afternoon, Margaret would come down, and that was it. But it was hard work, but all of a sudden it was all there, you know. So I had another 13 months of virtually socialising. Great.
During this time, were you monitoring what was happening in Vietnam?
Oh, keeping a watching eye on it, yeah. Nothing happened there that we didn't expect would happen. It only happened a little bit. Oh, I don't know whether it happened quicker than I ever thought, or later than I thought. But no, I thought it would happen that way. As soon as they said it'd be the Vietnamisation of the conflict, that it wouldn't go. They had some very good people, Vietnamese, but they had a lot of people on the take who were just looking after themselves, whereas the other side were dedicated. No, it was on the cards. But at the time, it all seemed worthwhile.
And after Singapore, what was your posting after that?
I got posted to 7th Sig Regiment. I got there and I was sent down to Canungra to the Administrative Technical Officer's course where I was commissioned. I went back there as the adjutant, and I was posted back to Keswick as the officer commanding the District Support Unit. Then that was phased out and I became the 2IC of the OC of the Personnel Depot, District Support Unit, which looks after everything in the state. Then I was there for 2 years and I got posted to the Australian Staff College on the staff there as the logistics officer and electronic warfare instructor. I did 2 years there. We left our house vacant, decided we'd rent it out, and 3 months after we rented it out, we got posted back to Adelaide as Camp Commandant of Hampstead. And while I was out there, I went up to Queensland as the senior electronic warfare umpire on Kangaroo 81. I got a signal up there asking to ring Don Willard, who was an ex-brigadier, which I did. He said, "Are you interested in getting out of the army?" And I said, "No, not really." He said, "Well, if you are, come and see me." Back he'd taken over as a director of the Liberal Party. I said, "Oh." So I got back and found out that I'd been posted to Canberra on promotion to major. I don't want to go. I've kept out of Canberra every posting. I hate the place. I can't think of one redeeming feature about Canberra. Commonwealth Club's probably the only one. Kept out of it. Anyway, so I rang Don Willard up to come and see me. So he offered me a job. I said, "All right, I'll have to take it." I went back, wrote out my resignation. My mate was the OC. In fact, Max Aiken, who had been in SAS with me, commissioned he was there as the OC of the Cadet Brigade. He said, "How'd it go?" He said, "Oh, all right." I accepted a job. He said, "Oh." I said, "Well, if you want a job, there's another job." He offered me a job as the administrator, and I didn't want it. I said, "I'll ring him up." He rang him up and told Max to go and see him. So he got the job. So we both put our resignations in at the same time. So that was next 10 years. I was the operations manager of the campaign organiser for the Liberal Party.
Can I just
and
go?
No, I don't always vote Liberal, but that's for go on.
I wasn't going to go there. I just wanted to go back to just coming out of Vietnam and
Yeah.
How did you feel? I'm just trying to think of how to word this. Did you have any problems settling into civilian life?
None at all.
So despite leaving a war zone, there was no...
None at all. I've had no problems with similar going anything. Going from non-commissioned to commissioned rank, that didn't worry me the slightest. Going from the army, the civilian life to the army, never worried me, just hadn't done it.
Did you have any nightmares or anything?
No. I think of things. I remember things. But I might every now and then I might dream about something that happened over in Vietnam or something or other, or Borneo. But I just treat that as just memories, normal memories. I mean, you remember everything. The only thing that jolts my memory sometimes is a car, the Kia. If I have a Kia in front of me, I look at that and I read KIA, killed in action. And invariably I'll start thinking of somebody that I know was killed over there, or sighted, killed or something. But it doesn't give me a nightmare or anything. I just think of it, and it's just another memory. No different than remembering my mother washing my socks or whatever it was. I mean, does that make me insensitive barbarian or something?
No, I'm curious now as to other things that might trigger memories.
That's the only thing I can think of. First time I seen it, I didn't read the KIA. I read killed in KIA, killed in action. Funny, isn't it? But I don't. It doesn't no problem with it or anything.
How about other men that have gone through your experience as well?
Don't know. I can't really speak for other men. I know people that say they have problems, and the only bloke I know personally the chap I was talking about was Second World War, Doug Collett. In 50 years, he used to wake up and think of his mate that went down in flames beside him in another Spitfire. But no, I know chaps that do legitimately have problems, wake up thinking about it. But no, it doesn't worry me. I just treat it as another memory. Same as good memories. You always have bad memories, but it doesn't haunt me if that's what you're getting. And I know a lot of people say they do. No, never worry me.
what was available to you if you were to be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder?
Oh, well, there's the counselling services at the moment, so I don't know how effective they have nothing to do with them.
But were they available when you first left Vietnam?
No. There was no counselling at all. We just came home and went back to our jobs. I think it depends on your background and where you come from. What you did. If you're a regular army, you probably don't have as many problems as a national serviceman, and that's understandable. But then again, I know blokes in the regular army that so good. I know a couple of them put it on, but that's by the way, and a couple are quite genuine. But I think it depends on your attitude when you go there too. I went there with an open attitude. I didn't really worry me whatever happened. I was scared out of a tiny mine occasionally, but then again, I do that when I walk across the road occasionally. A car's bearing down on me. What's the difference?
You made a comment about the national servicemen. What do you think makes their experience different to your experience?
Well, firstly, they went over there, in my opinion, partly trained compared with us. They went over there, they did their thing, and they came back. They virtually almost discharged straight away, went back to the civilian environment, and most of them never seen the blokes they served with again, or very, very rarely, where we associate all the time. It's got to give you a different slant, I think. That was brought home to me when they had the big return parade in Sydney. I can't remember years ago. I was at a bucks party with a friend of mine whose future son-in-law was bucks party, and he just had. The friend just had a heart attack. I went bit. I told his wife I'd look after him, make sure he didn't get too excited with the whole thing. Anyway, that's what. Anyway, I didn't know, but 3 of the chaps there were ex-Vietnam National Service, and they were all going over there. And they said to me, you're going to the big parade. And I said, nah. I said, I think it's all a big yawn. Oh God, they really got stuck into me, And they brought home to me the fact that they all came back and they virtually just said, right, thanks, Bo, go home. And with a few exceptions, I hardly seen anyone they served with. Now that's completely different than the way we did it, And I sympathise with it. I think they should have been done better. But on the same token, nearly every national serviceman that served in Vietnam volunteered to go there. They didn't have to go. Are you aware of that? It's a fallacy that all national servicemen went to Vietnam. Only 40% of all national servicemen went to Vietnam, and they had to go. They had to actually say they'd go. They didn't. They weren't forced to go. That's in the records. I didn't realise that myself till recently. In fact, these 3 chaps all said. I said, well, I can understand where you're forced to go. He said, we didn't have to go. We volunteered to go. We were given the option. And I didn't realise that. Something that doesn't come out. Now, whether it applies in 100% of the cases, but certainly it applied in a lot of them, the ones I've met. Has that ever come out in your interviews? No, it probably never comes up.
But Vietnam was one of the most political wars that the Australian public have had to digest in quite some time.
Since Iraq, prior to Iraq.
Well, sorry, yes, prior to Iraq, excuse me. What was the treatment of the vets? What was the attitude of people when they found out that you'd actually served in Vietnam?
I had never had any problem at all. I never ever had personally never had an adverse comment at all. People asked me what it was like. I'd say, and some of the things I'd say, and think, but that's not what we hear. I said, well, that's actually what happened. But no, If somebody ever did, I certainly can't remember, but I'm pretty sure that I'd never had any. Mind you, a lot of people don't pick me anyway.
And what did you miss about the army when you left?
Not a hell of a lot, actually. I'm still pretty well involved. I started the SAS Association up in South Australia, a member of the Training Team Association. I'm still a member of the Mess at Keddick. I'm a legatee and Legacy Club. I've been that for years. In fact, I chair the fundraising executive of Legacy, committee of Legacy. So I've still kept an involvement in it. And of course here I've been a member here and past president and all that sort of stuff. So no, it's I'm not completely divorced, so I still get some of the benefits of it. And but no, I don't find any. I don't miss anything from the style of life. I mean, again, it's what you make it. I went into a job that I virtually, for 10 years, I virtually did my own thing. I planned it, started up training courses and all that sort of stuff for prospective politicians. And so it really wasn't a lot different in the army.
And what would you say, just having reflected over all of your experiences today, what would have been your proudest moment during your army experience?
Good God. My proudest moment. Well, I don't think there's anything that particularly stands out. There's several that I would think. I think it was successfully being berated or badged in SAS in the old days. I would say being a company commander in Vietnam with Mike Force, being commissioned, I suppose. I could have been commissioned years ago if I wanted to. That's another story. And being married. That was one of the best things I did. The only thing the thing I regret is that I for years I always put my job, I shouldn't have done, I suppose. If the job came first, the family normally came second. Until I decided to get out of this job, and then my daughter just got into Westminster and that sort of stuff, and I thought now's the time to put the family first and put the army in the background. But I know a lot of people find it hard to agree, but you really got to in some cases. Your job, some people say family first, but if you don't have a decent job, you don't have a family in some cases. And Margaret always understood. But no, that's probably it.
And how would you like your experiences to be remembered? How would you like your experiences in Vietnam to be remembered?
Remember what?
Remembered.
Remember? Oh, by me or by someone else? I don't know that I really want to worry about anyone remembering it at all. I remember it with more fondness than anything else. Whether I'm a happy warmonger or not, I don't know. But I can't think of too much I didn't like about Vietnam. Enjoy, I'm not saying like. There were times that I wish I wasn't in the position I was at the time. But in retrospect, as an overall experience, I thought it was well worthwhile. And it probably made me a better person in some ways. It made me respect things that I didn't respect before. Don't ask me what they are in particular, but just a generality. And I don't think it did me as an individual any harm, let's put it that way. It certainly did a lot of people, there's no doubt about that.
And quickly, before our tape runs out, have you got any advice for future generations?
Yeah, don't have wars, talk yourself out of it. But unfortunately, it's a fact of life. I think peace in our time and everything, but while we have ego, avarice, and people that look at things, There'll always be wars. And anyone who says we should disband with armed forces and so forth is very naive. I wish that wasn't true, but unfortunately I think it is. There's always somebody who wants something that belongs to somebody else. Fact of life. My homily for the day.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
That was interesting.